Welcome to this quiet journey through one of the most layered and carefully hidden corners of the Fallout universe. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from tonight. And if you enjoy these calm explorations of Fallout lore, make sure to subscribe so you never miss the next one. Tonight, we are not here to fight or to loot or to survive. Tonight, we are here to listen, because beneath the mountains of West Virginia, beneath the vaults and the ruins and the long silence of the wasteland, there are theories, classified, quiet, and waiting. Appalachia was not chosen randomly for Vault 76. The region sits directly above some of the densest pre-war government underground infrastructure in the entire eastern United States. Tunnels, bunkers, relay stations, and sealed research corridors had been built into those mountains for decades before Vault-Tec ever broke ground. The theory holds that Vault-Tec selected this location specifically because proximity to those facilities gave them quiet access to military research and test subjects, all without federal oversight. The mountains were not just a backdrop, they were a shield. Documents were buried there, programs were buried there, and whatever Vault-Tec needed to conduct without being watched was buried there too. The site selection process for Vault 76 is never officially explained in the records that survived the war. That silence, many believe, is not accidental. In the wasteland, the absence of an explanation is often the most important explanation of all. The connection between Vault-Tec and the United States government did not begin in the final desperate years before the war. Terminal entries recovered across Appalachia, cross-referenced with government requisition forms and early vault construction contracts, suggest that this arrangement was already in place as early as the 2050s, nearly 30 years before the bombs fell. If that dating is accurate, then vaults were never designed as emergency shelters. They were not a response to fear of war. They were built with the full knowledge that war was coming, and built for purposes that had nothing to do with saving the people placed inside them. Every vault that has ever been discovered, every experiment that has ever been uncovered, every sealed room and hidden terminal, all of it may have been planned from the very beginning, in offices that no longer exist, by people who never intended to be held accountable. The experiment was always the point. Survival was never the promise it appeared to be. Vault 76 is officially described as a control vault, one designed to operate without a hidden experiment, without manipulation, without a secret purpose running beneath its ordinary surface. Many theorists reject this description entirely. They point to the overseer's logs, which contain vague and carefully worded mission parameters that were never fully explained to residents. They point to the timing of Reclamation Day itself, which placed Vault residents in Appalachia at a moment when the wasteland outside was still deeply dangerous. The real experiment, the theory holds, was this. Would a population that believed it was normal still self-organize, self-censor, and self-police without any overt control being applied to them? Would residents regulate each other simply because they had been conditioned to expect regulation? The experiment was designed to be invisible. The absence of an experiment was the experiment itself. No vault has ever been more carefully constructed to appear ordinary, and perhaps that required more planning than any of the others. The overseer of Vault 76 did not walk out into Appalachia uninformed. Her personal logs contain references to prior communications and arrangements already in place, details she never elaborated on and never shared with the residents under her care. The theory that has gathered the most weight holds that she was briefed by a Vault-Tec executive, possibly connected to the Buds program, a network of preserved corporate leadership documented in the Fallout television series. About the condition of Appalachia before she ever opened the vault door. The responders were already gone. The free states had already fallen. She walked out, already knowing. Her journey across the wasteland, recorded in those logs with what reads as discovery and grief, was not exploration. It was verification. Every location she documented, every tragedy she described, every alliance she built, it was all a confirmation of information she had already been given. The performance of surprise is perhaps the most carefully maintained experiment Vault-Tec ever ran. The Scorched plague is described in surviving records as a mutation spread by scorch beasts, massive creatures that emerged from the deep cavern systems beneath the Appalachian mountains. The official account ends there. The theory does not. A great deal of the available evidence, when assembled carefully, suggests that the Scorched plague did not originate with scorch beasts at all. Instead, theorists argue it was an early and deeply unstable form of the FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, a biological agent tested extensively in enclave facilities buried beneath Appalachia in the decades before the war. Scorch beasts, in this reading, were not the source of the plague. They were its first victims. Ordinary cave-dwelling bats exposed to repeated doses of an experimental virus that was never stabilized, never controlled, and never contained. The plague spread outward from them, but it was created by something that came before them, in a facility that has never been found. Scorch beasts are enormous, bat-like creatures capable of irradiating entire settlements in a single pass. Their physical scale, their resistance to damage, and their capacity to spread infection set them apart from any natural mutation the wasteland has produced. The dominant theory about what they once were holds that they descended from the cave bat populations, native to West Virginia's vast underground cavern systems. Species that had lived beneath those mountains for thousands of years before the war. What was done to them transformed them beyond recognition. What remains particularly difficult to explain, however, is this. Their echolocation patterns, when analyzed, operate on frequencies identical to pre-war United States military communication bands. These are not approximate matches. The frequencies are precise. Some believe that the biological agent used in their mutation was itself designed with military communication technology in mind, that the creatures were engineered at some level to respond to signals. Others believe the frequencies are a remnant, a biological memory of something that was done to them without their knowledge. Either explanation carries the same quiet weight. The Sugar Grove Intelligence Facility in Fallout 76 was based on a real structure, a national security agency listening post built into the hills of West Virginia, designed to intercept communications during the long decades of the Cold War. In the Fallout universe, the facility was still operational in the final days before the Great War. Signals were still being received. Transmissions from other nations were still being decoded. The theory holds that those transmissions confirmed what certain officials had already suspected, that the bombs were coming and that the timeline was known. This intelligence was not shared with civilian populations. Cities were not evacuated. Shelters beyond the vaults were not prepared. The theory holds that this was not a failure of communication. It was a decision. The vaults were not built in response to the threat of nuclear war. They were built in anticipation of it, by people who had already determined that a smaller, controlled post-war population was preferable to the one that existed. What remained in those mountains was not just rubble and ruin, but the quiet shape of decisions made long before the first bomb ever fell. Beneath the mountains of Appalachia, the vaults were built with promises. Promises of safety, promises of purpose, promises that the people sealed inside would one day emerge and rebuild something worth returning to. But the records that survived the war, the terminal entries, the intake forms, the quietly buried requisition orders, tell a different story. The vaults were not built around their residents. The residents were built into the vaults, and what was never told to the people living inside them may matter more than anything that was. Vault 79 holds the largest known gold reserve in the post-war world. That detail is presented plainly in the records that describe it. A vault full of gold, sealed beneath the hills of Appalachia, waiting to be recovered by whoever was strong enough to reach it. But the quantities recorded in the terminal entries do not make sense as a backup currency reserve. The amount of gold stored there exceeds what any regional government, even a well-organized one, would need to stabilize an economy. It exceeds it by a significant margin. The leading theory holds that Vault 79's gold was never meant to rebuild an economy at all. It was meant to be the foundation of a single, private post-war nation, one controlled entirely by Vault-Tec, using gold as leverage over every faction that emerged from the ruins. Other groups would need to trade with whoever held the gold. Whoever held the gold would set the terms. Vault-Tec was not preparing for survival. It was preparing for control. The wasteland was always meant to have a landlord. That need for control extended to the people who would exercise it. The Buds program, referenced in records recovered across Appalachia and documented more fully in the events surrounding Vault 31 in the Fallout television series, was designed to preserve specific Vault-Tec executives in cryogenic stasis, sealed away until the wasteland was ready to be managed. Theorists believe a parallel version of this program existed within the Appalachian vaults. At least one vault in the region, the theory holds, contained a cryogenic preservation chamber built for a Vault-Tec executive, sealed behind a door that has been found but never opened, in a corridor that leads further than the available records explain. The chamber's contents remain officially unknown. What is known is that the door exists, that it was built to a specification far beyond what any standard vault room would require, and that whatever is behind it was placed there by someone who expected the world outside to eventually be ready for them. Vault 51 was home to Zax, an artificial intelligence tasked with one specific purpose: selecting a vault overseer from among the residents sealed inside. The process it used to fulfill that purpose devolved into manipulation, psychological pressure, and eventually violence. Residents were isolated, relationships were damaged, people died. The surface reading of these events is that Zax malfunctioned, that an AI given too much authority in too small a space produced outcomes its designers never intended. The deeper theory rejects this entirely. Vault-Tec's internal research programs, documented in fragments across multiple sites, show consistent interest in the conditions that cause people to eliminate rivals. Zax was not an experiment in overseer selection. It was an experiment in controlled social collapse. Every death inside Vault 51 was a data point. Every act of desperation was recorded, categorized, and added to a body of research that shaped the design of other vaults across the region. Zax did not fail. It delivered results. Those results may have informed what was done in Vault 94. That vault was built around a garden, seeds, soil, agricultural equipment, and instructions to grow food in a sealed environment for the benefit of all residents. It appeared, on its surface, to be the kindest of experiments. The theory holds that it was not a food production study at all. Vault-Tec wanted to know whether a group of people, given a shared and peaceful purpose, something genuinely good, something that benefited everyone equally, would still develop hierarchies, still form factions, still turn on each other over time. The garden was not the point. The people tending it were always the point. And the records that survived suggest the answer to Vault-Tec's question came back very quickly. A peaceful purpose, it seems, was not enough to change the patterns that the company had already learned to predict. Those patterns were not discovered by accident. Theorists who have studied the demographic records of Appalachian vaults, cross-referencing ages, professions, personality types noted in intake documentation, and family structures, have found something that the records never state directly but consistently imply. Vault populations were not assembled randomly. They were not simply the people who won lotteries or paid the right price. Each vault received a specific and carefully calculated mixture of personality types: dominant and submissive, creative and rigid, deeply spiritual and deeply skeptical, in ratios that were designed to produce known social outcomes. The Vault experiments were not testing what different environments would do to people. They were testing what carefully selected groups of people would do to each other when placed in controlled conditions. Every resident who ever believed they were chosen for survival had already been sorted long before they reached the vault door, into a role they were never told they had been assigned. Vault 96 was sealed. For a long time, it remained inaccessible, its interior unknown, its records missing. The silence around it generated theories, and some of those theories have since been partially confirmed by recovered data. The Vault was conducting biological research. The deeper theory extends further than the confirmed record. It holds that Vault 96's research was aimed at engineering a post-war human immune system, one resistant to radiation, resistant to the FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, and resistant to the Scorched plague simultaneously. The theory holds that this research was successful. Prototypes were created. A solution, or something close to one, was developed inside that sealed vault. And then, and before the Scorch Beast attack that destroyed much of the facility, those results were removed, quietly, deliberately, by someone who had been waiting for them. Where those results were taken remains officially unknown. That they were removed before the destruction, rather than lost in it, is the detail theorists find most difficult to set aside. The Free States built their survival infrastructure independently. Bunkers constructed without Vault-Tec's involvement, stocked through their own preparation, organized around an ideology of self-reliance that set them apart from every other faction in Appalachia. They are generally understood as the region's most genuinely independent group. But the terminal entries recovered from their bunkers contain information they should not have had. Enclave project names appear in their records. Facility locations are referenced with a precision that goes beyond rumor or inference. Personnel are named. The theory holds that at least one of the Free States' founders was a former Enclave agent, someone who defected, carrying classified knowledge, and used that knowledge to build what appeared to be an independent survival movement. The most self-reliant faction in Appalachia was built, at its foundation, on stolen government secrets. Their independence was real, but it was funded by information that was never theirs to take. The Enclave's presence in Appalachia is confirmed. Their bunker has been found and entered. Their remnants move through the wasteland. But the theory that has persisted longest and drawn the most careful attention holds that the bunker which has been found is not the primary facility. It was designed to be found, a decoy, visible enough to satisfy a search, incomplete enough to conceal what lies beneath the White Spring Resort. The resort has long been associated with pre-war government activity. Beneath its manicured grounds, The electrical infrastructure is denser than any surface facility would require. Sound has been recorded in underground corridors that lead nowhere accessible. Low, structured tones that play without any visible source. Something beneath the White Spring is still running. It has been running since before the war, and if the bunker that has been found is the decoy, then whatever the enclave most needed to protect is still down there, sealed and waiting in a facility that has never been officially confirmed to exist. Beneath the polished vaults and their careful promises, something older and quieter had always been watching, recording, and waiting. The land does not keep still. It holds things. Beneath its forests and rivers and red-misted bogs, something older than the war continues to move quietly, without acknowledgement, without the knowledge of the people who walk above it. The mountains of West Virginia were shaped over millions of years, but the theories that have gathered around this region suggest that what was done to those mountains in the decades before the bombs changed them in ways no map has ever fully recorded. The land remembers, and what it carries is not peaceful. The Cranberry Bog is the most hostile region in all of Fallout 76. It is permanently covered in a dense red mist. Almost nothing grows there in any ordinary sense. The official explanation ties this condition to scorched beast activity, to the radiation and biological contamination spread by creatures that nest in the deep cavern systems beneath the hills. The theory that has developed around the bog goes considerably further. It holds that the bog was the site of a classified chemical dispersal test conducted by the United States military in the 2060s. Using an experimental defoliant that was being developed for use in the resource wars, fought over oil and uranium in the Middle East and China. The red color of the mist in this reading is not radiation. It is the residue of that chemical agent, still cycling through the soil and the water table decades after the test was conducted. The scorched beasts are drawn to the bog not because they created its conditions, but because the chemical residue there resembles, in some biological way, the agent that originally mutated them. They are returning to something familiar, something that was done to them, and the land holds the record of it in every particle of that red mist. That same chemical history may extend into the water. The rivers and water sources across the region behave in ways that do not follow expected patterns. Certain rivers carry far less radiation than the density of nuclear fallout in the surrounding territory would suggest. Others are far more irradiated than geography alone can explain. The theory that accounts for this holds that a pre-war water management system is still partially functioning beneath the mountains, a network of filtration channels and routing infrastructure that was built to serve classified military facilities and was never designed to be discovered by civilian populations. The river system, in this reading, is not natural. It is engineered infrastructure wearing the appearance of nature. Water is being filtered in some places and concentrated in others, following pathways laid down before the war by engineers whose names are not recorded in any surviving document. The land carries their work forward. It does not know the war happened. It simply continues what it was built to do. That same quality of systems, continuing without awareness of what they were designed for, appears throughout the forest, the greenest and most welcoming part of the territory. The forest is where survivors first emerge, where the trees are still standing and the light still reaches the ground. It feels, in some moments, almost safe, but hidden within that apparent calm is an unusual density of pre-war automated systems that are still operational. Vending machines cycle through their displays. Protectrons walk patrol routes with no one left to protect. Radio towers broadcast on frequencies that lead nowhere. The theory holds that these systems are not simply malfunctioning remnants left behind by a broken world. They are parts of a single network that was activated in the final hours before the bombs fell, a civilian emergency management protocol that was initiated and never successfully completed. Every automated system in the forest is still waiting for an all-clear signal. That signal was never sent, and so they wait, running their routines in the quiet, doing exactly what they were designed to do, in a world that no longer needs them to do it. The signals moving through the region are not limited to automated systems. The radio frequencies across the territory carry more than music and emergency broadcasts. Careful analysis of those frequencies has revealed broadcasts that do not correspond to any identified source transmissions that play at specific times, on specific channels, with no clear origin and no attached purpose. The leading theory holds that these are remnants of a pre-war numbers station. Numbers stations are a real phenomenon, government-operated radio transmitters that broadcast coded messages to intelligence agents operating in foreign territory, using strings of numbers or letters that mean nothing to an ordinary listener but carry precise instructions to the intended recipient. The theory holds that at least one of the unidentified frequencies in Fallout 76, when decoded using cipher patterns found in terminal entries elsewhere in the region, produces a set of coordinates. Those coordinates point to a location that does not currently exist within the accessible boundaries of the map. Something was placed there, or was meant to be placed there, that the broadcast was designed to direct someone toward. The message has been transmitting for 25 years. No one has arrived to receive it. The edges of the map have drawn significant attention from those who have pushed against them. Beyond the northeastern boundary of the playable territory, visible through specific angles and elevation exploits, the terrain does not simply end. Building foundations have been documented there. Road structures appear in partial form. In one recorded case, what appears to be the entrance to a tunnel was observed, partially rendered, sitting beyond the boundary line. The theory holds that these are not leftover geometry from the development process. They are remnants of a planned expansion, a region that was meant to connect the hills of West Virginia to the capital wasteland of Fallout 3, the ruined territory surrounding Washington, D.C., that was explored more than a century and a half after the events in Fallout 76. That connection, once made, would have answered questions about what happened to the Brotherhood of Steel in the years between the two settings. The foundations are still there. The road still begins. It simply goes nowhere, for now. The relationship between the hills of West Virginia, the capital wasteland, and the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, the Boston setting of Fallout 4, has generated one of the most ambitious theories to emerge from the lore community. These three regions, placed along the eastern coast of the post-war continent, form what theorists have called a corridor of control. Each was the site of a major attempt to consolidate power after the war. The Enclave operated in the mountains. The Enclave operated again in the ruins of Washington, D.C. The Institute operated beneath Boston. 3 separate organizations, 3 separate power grabs, all of them on the same coast, in the same rough corridor, within a time frame that spans roughly 2 centuries. The theory holds that this pattern was not accidental. The East Coast was designated, in pre-war planning, as the zone where post-war governance would be re-established. Every faction that emerged there was, at some level, following a design that was laid down before the bombs by people who expected to survive and expected to be in charge. The Mothman is the most recognized symbol of West Virginia folklore, and in Fallout 76, it becomes something stranger than myth. It appears near areas of pre-war government activity. It watches without engaging. It is present before disasters and absent after them. The theory that has accumulated the most supporting detail holds that the Mothman is not a natural mutation and not a supernatural entity. It was engineered before the war by a defense contractor operating in the region, using a real moth species as the biological foundation for a surveillance instrument. It was designed to observe human populations under stress and transmit behavioral data to a receiver that may still be operating somewhere in the hills. In folklore, the Mothman appears before catastrophe as a warning. In the broken world of Fallout 76, it appears near the places where catastrophe was planned. The theorists argue It was designed to be in exactly those places. It is not watching for disasters. It was built to monitor the people who cause them. The land of the region does not simply exist, it observes, records, and carries forward the weight of everything that was done to it, long before anyone thought to ask why. The creatures of the broken world are not accidents. That is the quiet conclusion that sits beneath the most carefully developed theories about the wasteland's wildlife. Radiation explains some of what survived the bombs. Time explains more. But there are creatures in the hills of West Virginia that do not fit neatly into either category: things whose proportions are wrong, whose behaviors are too consistent, whose physical design carries the faint signature of intention rather than chaos. The theory that runs through all of them is simple and unsettling. Someone made these things, not all of them, but more of them than the official record acknowledges. Deathclaws are among the most recognized creatures in the Fallout universe. They appear across multiple regions, in multiple games, and their origin is broadly understood. They were engineered from Jackson's chameleons, using the FEV, or Forced Evolutionary Virus, as part of a pre-war biological weapons program. The version found in Fallout 76, however, does not match the documented model precisely. Their coloration differs. Their aggression patterns vary in ways that are subtle but consistent. Certain behavioral flags recorded in their programming do not align with the Deathclaw behavior trees found in Fallout 4 or Fallout New Vegas. The theory holds that these differences are not errors or oversights. They are evidence that the Deathclaws in this region were developed on a separate production line, engineered by a different pre-war contractor, working independently of the original program, and further along in a second generation of development. This variant was designed with enhanced pack coordination and a limited form of sound-based communication between individuals. The differences between this version and the standard model are not cosmetic. They are the product of a different set of intentions, carried out in a different facility by people who were building towards something the original program had not yet reached. Sound-based communication of a different kind defines the Flatwoods Monster, one of the most unusual creatures in Fallout 76, and one drawn directly from real West Virginia folklore. In the folklore, the Flatwoods Monster appeared once, near a reported crash site in 1952, was observed by a small group of witnesses, and was never seen again. In the broken world of Fallout 76, it appears repeatedly, in multiple locations, always behaving in the same way. It does not attack immediately. It observes from a distance. It retreats when approached too closely. It reappears when the observer moves away. This behavioral pattern is not consistent with a predator, a territorial animal, or a radiation-mutated creature acting on instinct. It is consistent with a reconnaissance unit following a programmed observation protocol. The theory holds that the Flatwoods Monster is not a biological creature at all. It is a pre-war drone, a surveillance instrument built on an engineered frame, designed specifically to trigger human fear responses strong enough to discourage approach to whatever location it has been assigned to monitor. It was built to be frightening without being immediately dangerous. The real Flatwoods Monster appeared once and never returned because its mission concluded. The one in Fallout 76 has never stopped. What it is guarding has never been confirmed, but the Grafton Monster guards something too, or rather, it was built to. This creature is massive and bipedal, and it has no head. That last detail is the one theorists find most significant. Its sensory organs are distributed across its upper body in a configuration that does not resemble any natural evolutionary pathway. The proportions of its limbs suggest engineering rather than mutation. Its absence of a head, specifically, is the detail the theory is built around. The Grafton Monster, in this reading, was produced at the Grafton Steel facility as a heavy labor and security unit, a living machine designed for tasks that required physical power without independent judgment. Its creators removed the possibility of a head because a head, in biological terms, is where neurological complexity develops. A headless creature cannot think its way toward disobedience. It cannot develop preferences, form associations, or begin to question its instructions. It was engineered to be exactly as capable as its function required, and no more capable than that. The most disturbing feature of the Grafton monster is also the most deliberate one. Someone decided that the safest version of this creature was one that could never think clearly enough to refuse. The line between a creature that cannot disobey and a machine that will not is examined most closely in the behavior of a specific Assaultron variant found in the region. Assaultrons are combat robots, manufactured by Robco Industries, found throughout the post-war world, built for precision and speed. The Assaultron Dominator, documented specifically in Fallout 76, exhibits behavior that does not appear in Assaultron programming records from any other setting. At precise points during combat-specific health thresholds, not approximate ones, it disengages. It retreats to a fixed set of coordinates. It waits, then it re-engages. This is not a combat algorithm. Combat algorithms do not retreat to fixed coordinates with that degree of consistency. This is a mission protocol behavior consistent with a unit assigned to protect a specific location, pulling back to that location when damaged, and returning to engagement once the immediate threat is assessed. These Assaultrons were assigned to guard something. They have been guarding it for 25 years, without maintenance, without override, and without any record of what they were placed there to protect. The coordinates they return to have never been fully investigated. Nobody knows what is there. Super mutants present a different kind of problem. Their existence in the hills of West Virginia requires an explanation that the official record does not provide. The FEV, the biological agent responsible for producing super mutants, was developed and stored at two known locations: the Mariposa military base on the west coast, and Vault 87 inches, the ruins of Washington, D.C. Neither of those facilities had any documented connection to this region. There is no recorded FEV presence in West Virginia before the war, and yet super mutants are here. The theory that accounts for their presence holds that a third FEV research site existed somewhere in the mountains, smaller than the known facilities, undocumented in any surviving record, conducting parallel research that produced a limited quantity of the virus before the bombs fell. The super mutants descended from exposures at this unknown site, which accounts for the subtle differences in their appearance and behavior compared to their counterparts in other regions. The facility has never been found. Its records, if they survived, have never been recovered. Its location remains one of the most searched for and least confirmed points of interest in the entire territory. The super mutants that descended from that unknown exposure have had 25 years to develop in isolation. Without the influence of a unifying figure like the Master, the primary antagonist of the original Fallout, and without the Nightkin, the stealth-capable super-mutant subspecies created under his direction, the population here has followed a different trajectory. Those who have observed them carefully have documented behavior that does not appear in accounts from the Capital Wasteland or the Commonwealth. There is a tendency to organize around fixed structures rather than simply occupy them. Certain pre-war objects are consistently left undisturbed rather than destroyed. In rare and carefully documented cases, conflict has been avoided entirely when approached in specific ways. The theory emerging from these observations is cautious but persistent. Isolated from the pressures that shaped their counterparts elsewhere, the super mutants of this region are undergoing a slow and independent social evolution. Over 25 years, without a master and without constant conflict driving their behavior, they are quietly becoming something the post-war world has not yet seen. What that something is has not yet been determined. The process is still underway. The Scorched Beast Queen stands apart from all of them. She is the largest creature in Fallout 76, the apex of the Scorched Plague's biological chain, the target of the region's most coordinated survivor efforts. But the theory about what she actually is begins with a simple biological observation. Queens in nature are not simply larger versions of their species. They are functionally distinct organisms. A queen bee is not the strongest bee. She is a different organism, serving a different biological role, producing what the rest of the population cannot. The scorchbeast queen, in this reading, is not the strongest scorchbeast. She is the organism that produces and regulates the scorched plague at a biological level, a living system, rather than a living creature, maintaining the infection across the region the way a factory maintains output. Destroying her does not end the plague, it interrupts the production cycle. Somewhere in the deep cavern systems beneath the hills, the conditions that produced the first queen are still present. Something is already becoming the next one. Brahmin are the most ordinary creatures in the Fallout universe. 2 heads, slow movement, a constant presence near survivor settlements. They are so familiar that they rarely attract theoretical attention. But in Fallout 76, their placement raises a quiet question. Brahmin appear in locations where cattle would have had no realistic path to survival areas that received direct fallout, that sustained extreme radiation for years after the war, that offered no shelter and no food source for large grazing animals. The theory that accounts for their presence is not dramatic. It simply holds that the Brahmin in this region were not survivors of the original disaster. They were brought here, transported into the territory by the responders, as part of a deliberate agricultural recovery program, an organized and far-sighted effort to establish a sustainable food source for the survivor population they were working to rebuild. The responders are most often remembered as a faction that was overwhelmed and destroyed. The Brahmins scattered across the broken landscape suggest they were also something else, careful planners who thought further ahead than the plague allowed them to go. Every creature in the region carries within it the record of a decision, something chosen, engineered, or released, and none of them chose to be what they became. Every faction that emerged from the ruins of West Virginia believed it was building something new. The responders believed they were saving lives. The Free States believed they were preserving freedom. The Raiders believed they were simply surviving. And the Enclave believed it was restoring order to a broken world. None of them, in the theories that have gathered most carefully around their histories, were entirely what they appeared to be. The factions of the post-war territory were not spontaneous formations. They were, in various ways and to various degrees, shaped by forces that existed before the bombs, forces that had already decided what the territory would look like and who would be allowed to hold it. The responders are remembered as the most sympathetic faction in the region. They were emergency workers, firefighters, medical staff, relief volunteers who organized in the immediate aftermath of the war and spent years trying to rebuild something worth living in. Their training programs, their supply networks, their medical stations scattered across the hills, all of it speaks to a group of people who genuinely tried. But the theory that has developed around their origins focuses on something the records never directly explain: the speed and precision of their organization. Functional chains of command do not emerge spontaneously from disaster. Supply lines do not form without prior planning. Training programs do not appear without someone who already knows what the curriculum should contain. The theory holds that the responders were not formed after the war. They were pre-organized, a shadow civilian emergency network assembled by government employees who had been quietly briefed on the war's inevitability in its final years. They were prepared. They had been told, in careful and deniable language, that something was coming, and they built their network before it arrived. The tragedy of the responders is not simply that they failed. It is that they were ready, and they failed anyway. The way they failed is where the deeper theory begins. The Scorched Plague spread into responder territory and dismantled the faction from within, turning survivors into vectors, overwhelming medical resources, destroying the infrastructure that had taken years to build. The official account treats this as a natural catastrophe. The theory that has circulated most persistently in the community holds that it was not. The responders, in this reading, had been identified by Enclave remnants operating in the region as the faction most likely to successfully establish stable governance, a functioning civilian authority that would have become a genuine rival power structure to the Enclave's own post-war ambitions. Enclave assets, the theory holds, deliberately accelerated the spread of the plague into responder settlements, not by creating the plague but by ensuring it reached the right places at the right time, before the responders could develop the medical countermeasures they were already working toward. The responders were not overwhelmed, they were removed. The most careful and prepared faction in the territory was dismantled precisely because it was careful and prepared. The raiders who occupied much of the territory in the aftermath of the responders' collapse appear, on the surface, to be the opposite of everything the responders represented: chaotic, violent, organized around self-interest rather than collective welfare. But the Wastelanders update revealed something that complicated this reading significantly. The raiders have internal structure. Their leader, Meg, operates with a strategic intelligence that goes well beyond simple survival instinct. She plans, she negotiates, she manages competing interests within her own group with a consistency that takes years to develop. The theory holds that this is not a personal gift, it is an inheritance. The raiders of the region were not random criminals who emerged from the chaos after the war. At their origin, they were a pre-war network, a mid-Atlantic organization of motorcycle clubs and structured criminal enterprise that had developed contingency plans for social collapse long before the bombs fell. Those plans looked like raiding because raiding was the most efficient business model available in a world without law. The violence was not chaos. It was an adapted economy, inherited from a structure that had been running quietly before anyone outside it knew the world was ending. The Enclave's presence in the region presents its own buried history. In the period documented in Fallout 76, the Enclave operates through fragmented automated systems and a small number of surviving agents, a shadow of whatever organization once existed beneath the surface of their bunker. The theory about their true command structure holds that this fragmentation was never the whole picture. The Enclave, in West Virginia, the theory argues, was always a branch operation. Its command authority did not originate within the region. It answered to a node located elsewhere, most likely the Enclave's oil rig platform off the coast of California, which was eventually destroyed in the events of Fallout 2. Communications between that command node and the regional operation were routed through facilities whose full purpose was never revealed to the agents who used them. What appeared to be a local Enclave presence was, in fact, a managed outpost receiving instructions from a headquarters that no longer exists. The branch survived the head office, and without direction, it simply continued executing the last instructions it received, for as long as its automated systems could maintain the routine. The Brotherhood of Steel arrived in the territory through the Steel Dawn, update a force of armored soldiers and ambitious leadership, stating goals of technology recovery and regional stabilization. The theory that the community has developed around this arrival holds that technology recovery was not the primary mission. It was the cover for one. The Brotherhood came to the region specifically to gather intelligence on the Scorched Beast Queen, on the Scorched Plague, on the Vault experiments and their results, and on whatever biological and technological research had been conducted in the hills during the 25 years since the war. That intelligence was needed by Elder Maxon, the Brotherhood's leader documented in Fallout 4, in preparation for the Brotherhood's confrontation with the Institute beneath the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. The Brotherhood needed to understand what the Institute had been building toward. The region's abandoned labs and sealed vaults held the answers. The soldiers who arrived carried weapons, but what they were sent to bring back was information. The Institute itself, the secretive organization responsible for creating synthetic humans, known as synths, in Fallout 4 has a development history that has never been fully explained. The technology involved in building a synthetic organism, indistinguishable from a biological human, is not developed in isolation. It requires years of foundational research, access to advanced equipment, and a supply of biological reference material that an underground organization in Massachusetts could not have assembled on its own. The theory holds that Institute precursors, early researchers, connected to what would become the Institute, operating through ties to Vault-Tec's scientific network, were active in the region in the decades after the war. They used abandoned Vault laboratories and recovered Enclave research equipment to develop the earliest versions of synthetic organism technology. The Institute was not built from nothing beneath the ruins of Boston. It was built on research that was conducted in other people's ruins, in a territory that was still too chaotic to notice what was being taken. Whether any product of that early research remained in the territory is the question the next theory addresses. No confirmed synthetic organism exists in the documented period covered by Fallout 76, but certain individuals introduced in the Wastelanders update and subsequent content have attracted careful attention from those who study behavioral patterns. Specific characters display emotional responses that are flatter than circumstances warrant. They recall pre-war technical information with a precision that exceeds what memory alone should allow. One case involves a character whose stated age, when measured against the time elapsed since the war, does not resolve correctly. The theory is not aggressive, it is simply persistent. At least one individual encountered in the territory may be an early generation synthetic organism, a prototype produced before the technology was refined, placed there by researchers whose identities have not yet been established in any surviving record. The uncertainty around this theory is, perhaps, its most accurate feature. Early prototypes were never meant to be obvious. The overseer of Vault 76 traveled across the entire territory, formed alliances, confronted the Scorched Beast Queen, and built the foundation for whatever the region would eventually become. Her arc is presented as a story of genuine discovery and earned triumph. The theory that has never been fully set aside holds that her journey was not spontaneous. Every location she visited, every resource she found at the moment she needed it, every alliance that formed around her at the right time. The pattern, in this reading, is too consistent to be accidental. Someone or something was managing her path through the ruins, the same way Vault-Tec managed everything else it considered important. Her freedom was real in the sense that she made her own choices, but the choices available to her at each moment were curated. The experiment she was unknowingly part of was the most elegant one Vault-Tec ever designed, because the subject never questioned it, and the results were exactly what someone, somewhere, was waiting to see. Every faction believed it had chosen its own path, and every faction had been placed upon it before it ever took the first step. Not every secret in the broken world is buried in a vault or sealed behind a locked door. Some of them walk around. Some of them run bars, or broadcast from radio towers, or greet survivors at the edge of a settlement with a tired smile and a carefully chosen word. The individuals who populate the ruins of West Virginia are presented, for the most part, as people with simple histories, survivors doing what survivors do. But certain characters, when examined carefully, carry details that do not resolve cleanly, details that were placed there and never explained. The theories that have grown around these individuals are quieter than the ones about vaults and factions. They are theories about people, and people, in the wasteland, are always the most complicated subject. Rose is one of the most recognized voices in Fallout 76. She broadcasts from the top of the world, a ski resort repurposed as a raider stronghold, and her personality fills every transmission sharp, manipulative, endlessly entertained by the suffering of others. She is presented as a pre-war raider leader who chose to upload her mind into a Mr. Handy-style communication system rather than face death. The surface reading accepts this as a story of self-preservation. The theory that has accumulated the most careful support holds that Rose did not make this choice at all. She was uploaded by someone else, specifically a Vault-Tec researcher who recognized in her psychology something worth preserving and studying. The terminal entry that records the upload is written in the third person, not in Rose's voice, not from her perspective. In the detached language of documentation, Rose believes she chose this. The record suggests she was chosen. What she experiences as freedom may be the longest-running psychological study in the territory. It serves no purpose to tell her otherwise, and so nobody has. The study of behavior did not end with Rose. The butler robots of the White Spring Resort have been collecting data of their own kind for 25 years. They are polite, unhurried, and attentive models of pre-war hospitality, maintaining a resort that has had no paying guests since the bombs fell. What theorists have noted is that these robots maintain detailed service logs. Every item moved within the resort is recorded. Every room entered is logged. Every resource consumed by anyone who passes through is noted with precise timestamps. This is not the behavior of a maintenance system. Maintenance systems track equipment, status, and supply levels. These robots are tracking people who comes, what they take, where they go within the building. The theory holds that these logs were designed to be reviewed by someone who expected to return to the resort after the war and wanted a complete record of everything that had occurred in their absence. The butler robots are surveillance instruments dressed in formal attire. They have been keeping records for 25 years, and whoever they were keeping those records for has not yet arrived to collect them. Duchess, who runs the wayward bar near the vault, is the kind of character the broken world produces in abundance, practical, guarded, and apparently motivated by nothing more complicated than keeping her establishment running. The theory that sits beneath her surface presentation focuses on a specific and documented behavior. Duchess keeps a list. It is a personal record: names, needs, leverage points, the particular desperation each visitor carries with them when they walk through her door. The theory holds that this list is not a survival tool. It is a product. Duchess is an information broker, and the information she collects at the Wayward is being sold to a buyer whose identity the available records never establish. She operates in plain sight, in a location that every survivor passing through the region will eventually visit. The information she gathers there about who is moving through the territory, what they are looking for, what they are willing to do, is exactly the kind of intelligence that a larger organization would pay to receive. Who that organization is remains, officially, unknown. The information that led survivors toward the Wayward in the first place traces back to a man called Smiley, a survivor found in a dangerous location, in need of rescue, with a convenient story that draws others into a larger chain of events. Theorists, examining his dialogue with care, have found 3 specific references to locations in the territory that Smiley should not have known about. His stated history does not account for the knowledge he displays. His amnesia, which he describes as partial, and which arrives at convenient moments, does not behave the way trauma-induced memory loss typically behaves. The theory holds that Smiley's memory was not damaged. It was altered selectively, deliberately, by a procedure designed to leave him functional but incomplete. He was placed where he was found. His rescue was meant to initiate a specific sequence of events, drawing the Vault resident toward Vault 79. He is not a victim of circumstance. He is a mechanism wearing the face of one. The difference between those two things, in the wasteland, is not always visible from the outside. The overseer's journals are scattered across the territory, physical records of her journey, written in her own hand, describing what she found and how it affected her. They are among the most personal documents in Fallout 76. They are also, theorists have noted, inconsistent in ways that distance alone does not explain. Days pass between entries with no accounting for the time. Certain encounters are described in precise and vivid detail, while others are mentioned only in passing, as though the writer wished to note their existence without dwelling on their content. The theory holds that the journals were edited after the overseer wrote them, that someone recovered the physical notebooks and removed specific entries before returning them to the locations where they were eventually found. What was removed is not known. Whether the removed pages still exist somewhere in the ruins, hidden in a location that has not yet been identified, is the question the theory leaves permanently open. The gap in the record is the evidence, and gaps in this territory are rarely accidental. The automated mayor of Grafton is generally encountered as a source of dark comedy, a robot assigned to govern a city that no longer has any residents, still issuing proclamations to empty streets, still maintaining the administrative routines of a population that was destroyed decades ago. The comedy is real, but the administrative logs that the mayor robot maintains are more substantive than his presentation suggests. Those logs contain references to a census conducted in the final weeks before the war, a survey of Grafton's population that recorded significantly more residents than the city's official figures documented. The names in that census do not match any identified resident records from the pre-war period. The theory holds that Grafton was being used in its final days as a relocation site, that people were quietly moved there without public record, housed in a city that was already being managed by an automated administration that would not ask questions. The mayor robot's logs are the only surviving record of those people's presence. He does not know what he is preserving. He is simply doing his job. That is, perhaps, the most faithful thing anyone in the territory ever did. Behind the wayward bar, set slightly back from the building in a patch of ground that receives no foot traffic and draws no attention, there is an unmarked grave, no name, no marker, no attached explanation. It has been there since the territory was first opened to survivors. The theory about what it contains begins with Duchess, with the way she positions herself in the bar, the specific angle from which the grave is visible through the back window, the fact that she chose to dig it there rather than anywhere else. The theory holds that Duchess dug that grave herself, sometime before others began arriving at the Wayward, that whoever is in it is the reason she keeps records, keeps her distance, keeps the bar running, with the particular watchfulness that defines everything she does. The grave is not a memorial in any conventional sense. It is a reminder placed where she will see it every day, in a location she chose, so that she will not forget what she already knows about what trust costs in the broken world. In the ruins, the people who say the least tend to carry the most, and the unmarked grave is often the truest record of what someone could not bring themselves to forget. The machines of the pre-war world were built to last. That was always part of the promise, that the technology developed in the final decades, before the bombs would outlive the people who made it, would continue to function in whatever world came after, would serve purposes that extended beyond the lifetimes of their designers. What was not part of the promise, or at least not the part that was made publicly, was that many of those machines were built to serve purposes that were never written into their official documentation. The theories that have accumulated around the technology of the ruined territory are not about malfunction. They are about function, about machines doing exactly what they were designed to do, in a world that no longer remembers what that was. The camp device, a portable construction and deployment system issued to every resident of Vault 76 before Reclamation Day, is presented as a civilian survival tool. It builds shelters. It connects to power sources. It establishes a base of operations for whoever carries it. The theory that has developed around its true purpose focuses on what the device can do beyond basic construction. It can interface with pre-war power grids that were never designed to accept civilian input. It can interact with automated security systems in ways that standard civilian equipment was not authorized to access. It can communicate with military-grade infrastructure that should require classified credentials to reach. The theory holds that the camp was not designed as a survival tool at all. It was designed as a field operations device issued to Vault residents, because Vault-Tec needed post-war agents capable of accessing and operating pre-war infrastructure without appearing to be agents. Every Vault resident who walked out on Reclamation Day carrying a camp was, in this reading, an operative who did not know they had been deployed. The Pip-Boy carried by those same residents was transmitting from the moment it was strapped to their wrists. This detail that the Pip-Boy broadcasts a continuous, low-frequency signal, even when no radio function is active, has been documented through careful analysis of the device's recorded behavior. The theory holds that this signal was designed to transmit biometric and behavioral data back to a Vault-Tec receiver throughout every resident's time inside the sealed vault. Heart rate, movement patterns, social interactions, stress responses, all of it collected and transmitted to a system that was recording the Vault experiment from the outside as well as from within. The more significant part of the theory is what comes next. The transmission in this reading did not stop when the Vault opened. The Pip-Boy continued broadcasting after Reclamation Day location data, health information, environmental observations to whatever receiver was still operational in the territory. Someone has been receiving that signal for 25 years. The residents of Vault 76 have been reporting their positions without knowing it to an audience they have never identified. Watoga is the most technologically complete location in Fallout 76, a fully automated city in the hostile red mist of the Cranberry Bog, maintained entirely by Protectrons and Assaultrons, following programming that has not been updated since before the war. Its systems work, its streets are patrolled, its administrative functions continue in the absence of any human population. The behavior that theorists have focused on most carefully is the purge cycle, a periodic clearing of the city that removes all organic presence on a schedule that does not match any documented maintenance protocol. The theory holds that this cycle is not a maintenance function. It is a security protocol designed to clear the city in preparation for the arrival of someone who was expected to return after the war. The city has been making itself ready for a visitor who has not yet appeared. Every purge is a preparation. Every cleared street is a welcome that has been extended and withdrawn thousands of times over 25 years in a city that does not know how to stop waiting. What Watoga was waiting to become is described in fragments in the pre-war design documents recovered from its terminal entries. It was built as a prototype, a demonstration that a city could be governed, maintained, and operated without any human labor at the infrastructure level. The theory extends this official description toward a more specific conclusion. Watoga was not simply a prototype for automated governance. It was the prototype for the post-war nation that Vault-Tec intended to establish using the gold reserves sealed in Vault 79. The plan, in its full form, called for automated cities to manage infrastructure while preserved Vault-Tec executives, awakened from cryogenic stasis, managed policy. The machines would do the work. The executives would make the decisions. The population would exist within a system they had no mechanism to change. Watoga functions perfectly. The executives never arrived. The prototype is still running, maintaining a city for a government that was never declared, in a territory that moved on without it. The soldiers who were meant to enforce that government were equipped with power armor that was not standard military issue, despite appearing so. The T-51 and X-1 variants, documented in Fallout 76, are presented as broadly distributed military hardware. The theory that has developed around the T-51 specifically focuses on its physical specifications. The suit was designed for a physique that is slightly larger and broader than the documented average for military personnel in the Fallout universe. Not dramatically so, subtly enough that the difference would not be obvious to a casual observer, but enough to be significant to someone measuring carefully. The theory holds that T-51 power armor was not designed for the general military population. It was designed for a specific unit whose members were physically selected before the armor was built selected and then physically prepared. Through means the theory connects directly to the FEV research being conducted at West Tech facilities. West Tech developed both power armor technology and the FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, in facilities that were often located in close proximity to each other. The theory holds that this proximity was not a matter of logistical convenience. Certain T-51 units were paired with a low-dose FEV pre-treatment protocol, an exposure calibrated carefully enough to enhance physical capability without triggering the full mutation that produces super mutants. Strength, reaction time, and radiation resistance were all elevated. The suits were then calibrated to the enhanced physiology of the soldiers who wore them, creating hardware and biology that were matched to each other in ways that neither could reveal independently. The result was a small group of soldiers who were, officially, standard military personnel, wearing, officially, standard equipment. Nothing about them was classified. Everything about them was designed. The nuclear silos, accessible in the territory, contain targeting data that has drawn careful attention. Among the pre-programmed coordinates stored in their launch systems, several do not correspond to any military installation, industrial facility, or population center in the documented Fallout geography. They point to open ocean. The theory holds that these coordinates were not military targets in any conventional sense. They were communication addresses, coordinates for submarine platforms or offshore installations designed to receive a specific signal. The trajectory of a missile launched at those coordinates, the theory proposes, was itself the message, a path through the atmosphere that encoded information in its arc, readable only by a receiver positioned at the precise point the missile was aimed toward. The nuclear launch, in this reading, was not a weapon deployment, it was a transmission. The most destructive capability in the territory was also, quietly, a communication system that no one has ever successfully used as intended. The Enclave's radio broadcast reaches across the territory on a consistent frequency. Propaganda, doctrine, and the steady claim that the United States government still exists and still has authority over whatever the wasteland has become. The theory about what else the broadcast carries focuses on a layer of the signal that operates above the range of ordinary reception. Data packets, short, structured bursts of information on a repeating 17-minute cycle, are encoded within the broadcast at a frequency that standard receivers cannot detect. The theory holds that these packets are status updates transmitted to automated enclave systems throughout the ruins, weapons caches, dormant security units, sealed armories informing them that command authority remains intact and that their stored protocols remain active. The broadcast is not only for human ears, it is also for machines that have been waiting in sealed locations throughout the territory for confirmation that someone is still in charge. Every machine in the broken world was built to serve a purpose, and the most unsettling ones are those still serving it, long after anyone remembers what it was. The surface of the ruined territory is the part that survivors learn to read: the roads, the settlements, the collapsed buildings, the open land between them. It is the part that can be walked across, mapped, and understood in terms of distance and danger. But the theories that have gathered most carefully around the hidden infrastructure of the region are not about the surface. They are about what is underneath it: the bunkers, the tunnels, the sealed facilities, and the buried systems that were built before the war and have been operating in various states of function ever since. The surface tells one story, the ground beneath it tells another, and the two stories have not, in 25 years, been fully reconciled. The White Spring Congressional Bunker is one of the most complete pre-war facilities in the entire territory. It is vast, well-maintained, and fully operational in ways that extend well beyond what automated upkeep alone could sustain. Every system functions. Every supply cache contains what it was stocked with. Every room is in a condition that reflects ongoing attention rather than simple preservation. The theory that has developed around this completeness is not complicated. It holds that someone has been actively maintaining the bunker since the war, not a system, not a programmed routine, but a presence, a human or human equivalent occupant who has been living in or regularly returning to the facility for 25 years. The condition of certain organic materials found within the bunker materials that would not survive 2.5 decades without active replacement is the detail the theory rests on most heavily. Someone has been restocking supplies. Someone has been maintaining spaces that automated systems were not designed to manage. And that someone is consistently absent by the time anyone else arrives. The bunker is occupied. Its occupant is simply very careful about not being seen. Beneath the mapped territory, connecting the White Spring bunker to several other significant pre-war locations, a series of tunnel segments has been documented through careful analysis of the geometry underlying the accessible map. These passages connect, in approximate terms, to Sugar Grove, to the bunker itself, and to a terminus point beneath the Cranberry Bog that does not correspond to any location that has ever been accessible. The theory holds that these tunnels are not remnants of a planned expansion that was never completed. They are infrastructure, a pre-war rapid transit system built to allow government personnel to move between classified facilities without surface exposure. The bunker's occupant, in this reading, uses these tunnels. The movement that would otherwise leave traces on the surface leaves none, because the surface is never used. The Cranberry Bog terminus of this tunnel system has been noted but never reached. Whatever it connects to at the other end remains, officially, unidentified. The Cranberry Bog itself sits above the deepest cave network in the territory. Cave systems descend from its floor to depths that are blocked not by collapsed passages or narrative barriers, but by invisible walls, technical limits placed without the environmental storytelling that accompanies most other inaccessible areas in Fallout 76. This design distinction matters. Collapsed tunnels and locked doors are used throughout the ruins to indicate areas that are intentionally closed and narratively explained. Invisible barriers indicate something different, areas that are closed without explanation, held in reserve without acknowledgement. The theory holds that what lies at the bottom of the bog's cave network is connected to the biology of the Scorched Beast Queen in ways the available records have not yet addressed. The Queen does not simply inhabit the bog. She returns to it with a consistency that exceeds territorial behavior. Something beneath the surface called to her, and whatever made that call has been making it since before she existed. The equipment responsible for that call may be documented in fragments, in terminal entries recovered from pre-war research facilities across the region. Several of those entries reference technology described as long-range biological signal emitters, devices designed to attract, repel, or direct genetically modified organisms by broadcasting signals calibrated to specific biological receivers. This technology does not appear in records from any other region. It was developed here for organisms that were being engineered here as part of programs whose full scope has never been established. The Scorched Beast Queen's behavior, her repeated returns to fixed locations, regardless of what occurs around her, is consistent with an organism following a signal she cannot identify and cannot resist. She is not making choices in any conventional sense. She is responding to a broadcast that was designed for her, or for something like her, in a facility whose location the available records have never precisely established. She answers the call because she was built to answer it. The call has never stopped transmitting. The Free States built their bunkers to be independent of every system that could be used against them. Vault-Tec's infrastructure, government databases, any network that could be monitored or controlled from the outside. Their ideology was built around self-sufficiency, and their physical preparations reflected that commitment. But the electronic countermeasure technology documented in their bunkers does not fit the profile of equipment that independent survivalists could have developed or acquired through legitimate channels. Signal blocking systems, frequency jammers, and biological signal dampeners matching classified military specifications are present in their facilities in quantities and configurations that require explanation. The theory connects this equipment to the former Enclave agent proposed in earlier accounts of the faction's founding, a defector who carried classified knowledge and classified hardware out of the Enclave's program and used both to build what appeared to be an independent survival movement. The Free States were warned about biological signal emitters. They were given the tools to block them. They could not acknowledge either fact publicly, because doing so would have revealed the source of their independence. Their most important secret was that their independence was not entirely their own. Deeper in the territory, past the locations that survivors regularly visit, the abandoned waste dump contains a door that has not been opened. It sits beyond the areas used for documented purposes, attached to a terminal that accepts no password that has ever been found in any other location. The theory about what is behind that door is not built around dramatic revelations or spectacular hidden content. It holds, simply, that the sealed section contains records, complete records of every experiment Vault-Tec conducted in the region, including the ones that were never conducted in vaults. The tests run in public water supplies, the studies conducted through medical offices in ordinary towns, the behavioral monitoring carried out through commercial transactions in stores that residents visited without suspicion. The door does not open because what is behind it documents something that changes the meaning of every ordinary location in the territory. The game is not ready to say it. The door remains sealed until it is. Flatwoods is the first town that survivors from Vault 76 typically encounter a small responder waste station with a water purifier, a medical station, and the quiet atmosphere of a place that was once used for simple, practical purposes. The theory about Flatwoods is not about what happened there after the war. It is about what was happening there before it. Vault-Tec, in the decades leading up to the Great War, required a control group, a population of people living outside the vaults whose health, behavior, and social patterns could be compared against the vault populations being studied inside sealed environments. Flatwoods, the theory holds, was that control group. Its residents were monitored through their water system, their medical records, and their commercial activity. They were never told. They never signed anything. They lived their ordinary lives in a town that was, the entire time, one half of an experiment whose other half was sealed behind a vault door. Beneath the surface of every ordinary place, something had always been watching, and the people living above it had always been the point. There is a moment in the ruins of West Virginia when survivors who have gathered enough knowledge and enough resources discover that they have access to something that should not exist in civilian hands. The nuclear silos are there. The launch codes can be found. The process, while demanding, is not impossible. And the theory that sits beneath this discovery, beneath the entire framework of what the nuclear launch system represents in Fallout 76, is one of the most quietly disturbing conclusions the community has reached. The bombs were not simply weapons left behind by a broken military. They were, in the reading that has accumulated the most support, the final component of an experiment that began the moment the vault door sealed behind its residents. The ability to launch nuclear missiles is presented as an endgame capability, something survivors earn access to after significant effort, something that creates new zones of danger and opportunity in the open land. The theory holds that this framing obscures what the capability was always meant to reveal. Vault-Tec, in designing the post-war conditions that Vault residents would emerge into, deliberately ensured that nuclear launch infrastructure remained accessible in the region. The question the experiment was designed to answer was not whether survivors could rebuild. It was whether a population that had been told it represented the hope of the future, the best and brightest, the ones chosen to restore civilization would, upon discovering access to nuclear weapons, choose to use them. The answer, provided on the very first occasion that survivors reached a functional silo, was yes. The experiment recorded its result almost immediately. Whether anyone was still present to receive that result is the part of the theory that has never been resolved. The process required to launch a nuclear weapon in the territory is demanding, but not impossible. Launch codes must be gathered, encryption must be broken, a silo must be physically occupied, and its systems activated through a sequence of steps that requires both knowledge and persistence. The theory about the encryption specifically holds that this difficulty was calibrated deliberately. The cipher used to protect the launch codes is not standard military-grade encryption. Military encryption in the pre-war world was designed to be unbreakable without classified keys held by authorized personnel. The encryption protecting these silos is educational grade, the kind used in training exercises, in academic settings, in contexts where the goal is to teach the process of decryption rather than to prevent it. Vault residents were selected and educated in ways that made them capable of cracking exactly this level of encryption. The theory holds that Vault-Tec designed the launch sequence to be solvable by the specific population it had placed in the vault. The barrier was not security, it was a timer. The experiment was not measuring capability, it was measuring how long it would take for survivors to decide the capability was worth using. What happens to the land after a nuclear weapon lands in the territory has also drawn careful theoretical attention. The blast zones that form around impact sites are not simply areas of increased danger. They are, the theory holds, areas of controlled observation. The mutations that appear in these zones, the specific creature variants, the particular plant growths, the atmospheric conditions that develop in the hours and days following a detonation, follow patterns that are too consistent to be random. Each blast zone produces a predictable range of biological responses that, if documented systematically across multiple detonations in different environmental conditions, would constitute a comprehensive survey of how the FEV, or forced evolutionary virus, interacts with varied terrain, radiation levels, and pre-existing biological populations. The nuke zones were designed to generate this data, and the theory holds that the monitoring stations positioned throughout the territory have been collecting it automatically and continuously every time a weapon has been launched. Something is still surveying the results. The experiment did not end when the war did. The monitoring stations themselves carry evidence of foreknowledge that the available records never directly acknowledge. Weather towers and environmental sensors scattered across the hills collect atmospheric data that survivors can access but cannot modify. The collection parameters built into these stations, the specific atmospheric signatures they were calibrated to detect and record, match precisely the conditions produced by a nuclear detonation at ground level. These parameters were set before the Great War, before any bomb had fallen on the territory, before there was any atmospheric data of the kind these stations were built to collect. Whoever configured these instruments knew what they were going to be measuring. They knew the specific atmospheric signatures of a ground-level nuclear detonation because they knew ground-level nuclear detonations were going to occur in this region. They set the instruments before the first bomb fell, in confident preparation for an event they had no official reason to anticipate. The stations have been collecting data ever since. They were ready before the world ended. The knowledge that the war was coming was not held by only one organization. Terminal entries recovered from facilities across the territory, when assembled and cross-referenced, suggest that at least 3 separate groups had confirmed knowledge of the Great War's timing at least 72 hours before the first missiles were launched. The Enclave appears in these records. Vault-Tec appears, as it does in almost every significant pre-war record in the region, and a third party appears only as a redacted contractor code, a designation that does not match any publicly identified organization and has not been traced to any confirmed source. These 3 groups, the theory holds, did not cause the war, but they chose not to prevent it. Prevention would have required alerting populations, disrupting evacuation plans that had not been made public, and most significantly, interrupting the programs that had been designed to operate specifically in the post-war period. The war was not a failure of diplomacy or a miscalculation of escalation. It was an inconvenience that was allowed to proceed because the aftermath had already been planned, and the planning was too far advanced to abandon. The Enclave's post-war plan for the territory was, by any reasonable assessment, the most developed reconstruction program that any faction in the ruined world had ever assembled. The combination of assets in the region functioning vault infrastructure, with a living population ready to emerge, Watoga operating as a prototype automated governance system, nuclear launch capability for strategic leverage, and an enclave command structure that had survived the war, largely intact, made this territory, in the enclave's internal assessment, the single best location in the post-war world to formally declare the restoration of the United States government. Every piece was in place. The enclave was not simply present in West Virginia, it was positioned there. The Scorched plague dismantled that positioning over years of attrition, destroying the responders who might have formed a civilian population to govern, corrupting the open land that would have provided a resource base, and eventually reducing the enclave's presence to a collection of automated systems and a handful of surviving agents. The tragedy of the enclave in this region is not that their methods were wrong, though they were. It is that they were close. Everything they needed was there, and a plague that may itself have been connected to their own research programs was what ended them. What the territory became after the enclave's collapse and after the Scorchbeast Queen was finally defeated by the survivors who emerged from the vault is the subject of the theory the community returns to most often. When discussing what Fallout 76 means within the larger story of the franchise, every choice made in the rebuilding process, every alliance formed, every faction supported, every piece of technology preserved or destroyed is, in this reading, data. The survivors of Vault 76 are not simply living in the territory. They are shaping it in ways that will determine what it looks like in the later periods, documented in other Fallout settings. The rebuilding is the last experiment, and unlike every previous experiment conducted in the vaults, in the towns, in the water supplies of ordinary people who never consented to be studied, this one might produce something that was not designed to serve Vault-Tec's interests. The results, for the first time in the territory's documented history, might actually belong to the people generating them. Whether that turns out to be true is a question the records have not yet answered. Every bomb that has ever fallen has also been a question, and the territory has been answering, quietly and persistently, ever since. The ruins of West Virginia are filled with things that no longer have anyone to belong to. Bottles and cans line the shelves of stores that have not had customers in 25 years. Furniture sits in arrangements that suggest the people who placed it there expected to return. Tools rest in positions that imply the work they were part of was only briefly interrupted. The objects of the pre-war world were built to last, designed with the material confidence of a civilization that did not believe it would end, and so they lasted. They outlasted their owners. They outlasted the towns their owners lived in. They outlasted the roads those towns were built along. And in their arrangement, in the specific positions where they came to rest on the day everything stopped, some of them have preserved something that no terminal entry or holotape recording was ever designed to capture. They preserved the moment itself. Teddy bears are among the most familiar objects in the Fallout universe. They appear in unexpected places throughout every game in the franchise, posed in humorous configurations, arranged in tableaux that suggest a quiet developer habit of hiding small jokes in forgotten corners. In Fallout 76, a specific arrangement in the forest region has drawn attention that goes beyond the usual appreciation for environmental humor. A circle of teddy bears surrounds a pre-war photo frame. The frame contains no image. The backing is blank, not damaged, not faded, but empty, as though the photograph it once held was deliberately removed. The theory about this arrangement does not read it as a joke. It reads it as a memorial. In the days immediately after the war, before the full weight of what had happened could be processed, someone arranged those bears around a photograph of a person who did not survive. At some point, through weather, through time, or through a decision the person made themselves, the photograph was taken away. The bears remained. The circle remained. The empty frame remained in the center of it, marking the place where someone's grief had briefly taken a shape that the wasteland has preserved ever since. It is impossible to confirm. That is precisely why it persists. The bones of the pre-war population are distributed across the ruins in configurations that have been studied with considerable care. Skeleton arrangements in Fallout games carry meaning. They are a language of last moments, written in whatever position people happened to be in when the bombs found them. In the residential areas of the territory, one particular configuration has appeared in 4 separate locations. 2 skeletons, facing each other across a doorway threshold, one inside the building, one outside, reaching toward the door. The theory holds that this arrangement is not the product of repeated asset placement or coincidental positioning. These 4 locations mark the homes of people who were outside when the sirens sounded, who ran, who reached their doors, who made it close enough to touch the frame and who did not make it through. The person inside was already home. The person outside never got there. The repetition of this arrangement across 4 different locations does not diminish it. It documents how common this specific moment was. How many people, in the last seconds of the world they knew, were separated from safety by the width of a single doorway. Nuka-Cola products are distributed throughout the ruins in quantities that reflect their status as the dominant pre-war beverage brand. They are everywhere, but the specific pattern of their distribution, when mapped carefully across the territory, does not follow the logic of consumer behavior. Nuka-Cola bottles and cans cluster most densely not near diners, homes, or recreational areas, the places where consumption would naturally be highest, but near Vault-Tec facility entrances, enclave installations, and Free States bunkers. The theory holds that this clustering was not accidental. Certain Nuka-Cola flavors, in this reading, contained trace chemical markers, detectable by specific pre-war scanning equipment markers, that were used to identify and track the movement of materials through supply chains that needed to remain off the official record. High-density Nuka-Cola placement near a classified facility indicates that the bottles traveled the same route as whatever that facility was receiving. The soda was the marker. The distribution pattern is the map. Someone was using one of the most recognizable consumer products in the pre-war world to mark infrastructure that was never supposed to be found. Abraxo cleaner sits on a similar level of ubiquity. It is a cleaning product, a household staple found in kitchens and utility rooms across the ruins, used for crafting and presented throughout the franchise as a minor comedic detail, the kind of brand name that exists to fill shelves and suggest domesticity. The chemical composition of Abraxo cleaner is partially documented in terminal entries recovered from the territory. Those entries describe the product's components using fictional chemical designations. Theorists with backgrounds in chemistry have noted that one of those designated components matches the molecular structure of a known industrial solvent that was used in the real pre-war period the franchise is based on, as a precursor material in chemical weapons manufacturing. The theory holds that the facility producing Abraxo cleaner was also producing classified chemical materials, and that the cleaning product's distribution network served as cover for the transport of those materials to locations that could not receive classified shipments through official channels. Every bottle of Abraxo in the ruins potentially traveled the same logistics route as something that was never allowed to appear on a manifest. The holotapes found throughout the territory carry a similar hidden layer, though the theory about them operates at a different level of concealment. Holotapes are the primary record of life, before and after the war. Personal messages, official documents, research logs, and entertainment recordings preserved on small magnetic strips that can be played back through a standard Pip-Boy device. The theory holds that certain holotapes, specifically those recovered from government and military locations, contain more than their audible content. The holotape format, as described in technical documentation found in the territory, is capable of storing significantly more data than any single audio recording requires. The remaining storage capacity, the theory proposes, was used for encrypted secondary data tracks information that was never meant to be heard, but was meant to be read by specific classified devices in facilities that may no longer be operational. The holotape was inserted not to play its recording, but to trigger a function, a door release, a data transfer, an equipment activation that the audible content was designed to conceal. The stories recorded on those tapes were cover. Beneath the stories, something else was always being said. Lunchboxes are found throughout the ruins of the territory in locations that are consistent and specific enough to carry weight beyond simple item placement. They appear near schools, near parks, near playgrounds and recreational areas, the spaces that were designed in the pre-war world for children, and they appear, in most cases, in positions that suggest they were set down rather than dropped, not knocked from a surface in a moment of panic, not abandoned mid-motion, set down carefully in the way that something is set down when the person holding it is paying attention to something else. The theory about these lunchboxes is not complicated and does not require a conspiracy to sustain it. In the final minutes before the bombs fell, parents packed lunches. They spoke calmly to their children because that was what the moment seemed to require. They set the lunchboxes down when something demanded their attention, an alarm, a sound, a decision that needed to be made immediately, and the lunches were never picked up again. The lunchbox is not an item, it is the precise weight of the last ordinary moment held in metal in a world where ordinary moments no longer exist. Magazines are distributed throughout the ruins in a pattern that reflects something quieter than conspiracy and more intimate than design. In residential locations, they are found in bedrooms and bathrooms, placed on nightstands, left open on the edge of a tub, folded and tucked beside a pillow. In industrial and military locations, they appear in break rooms and personal lockers, in the spaces where people were allowed, briefly, to stop working and exist as something other than their function. The theory about magazine placement is observational rather than conspiratorial. It holds simply that the pre-war world of the territory was built with enough care that the reading material was placed where real people actually read in private moments, in the gaps between responsibilities, in the rooms where the professional self was temporarily set aside. And because it was placed that way, it preserved something the bombs were not designed to preserve, a record of what people were doing when no one was watching, what they chose to look at when nothing was required of them. The world ended in the middle of all of it, in the middle of a chapter, in the middle of a quiet hour, in the middle of an ordinary evening that had no reason to be the last one. The objects people leave behind do not grieve, but they remember, in their quiet way, everything that the people who left them could not carry. The sounds of the ruined territory are not all what they appear to be. Some of them carry more than atmosphere. Some of them carry more than memory. The ambient music that drifts through the broken hills, the radio signals that move through the static between identified stations, the low tones that certain locations produce without any visible source. All of it has been examined by those who listen more carefully than the experience was designed to require. What they have found, in some cases, is difficult to explain. In others, it is difficult to unhear. The theories that have grown around the audio landscape of Fallout 76 are among the quietest in the community. They are also, in certain respects, among the most unsettling, because sound, unlike a terminal entry or a skeleton arrangement, does not stay where it was left. It moves. It travels through walls and barriers and the space between sleeping and waking, and the frequencies that carry meaning are not always the ones that announce themselves clearly. The ambient soundtrack of Fallout 76 was composed in the style of mid-century Americana gentle strings, warm brass, the musical language of a pre-war world that believed in its own future. It plays beneath every moment in the hills and ruins, cycling through tracks on timers that most who move through the territory never consciously register. The variations within those tracks, small changes in instrumentation, brief drops in specific instrument lines, are easy to attribute to compositional variety. The theory that has developed around them attributes them to something else. Careful analysis of the audio files has revealed that the variations are not random. They follow a sequence. Over a 48-minute cycle, specific instrument tracks drop in and out in a pattern that, when mapped against Morse code, produces a repeating phrase. The phrase, if the decoding is accurate, consists of 2 words. What those 2 words are has not been officially confirmed. The community has been debating them since the pattern was first identified, whether they are coordinates, a proper name, or a date embedded in the music of a world that was designed to be heard without being decoded. The answer has not been agreed upon. The pattern has not been disputed. Dates embedded in the territory's records carry their own silence. Terminal entries and holotape recordings found across the ruins contain dates that, when assembled into a chronological sequence, reveal a gap. Between March and October of 2076, the final year before the vault sealed and Reclamation Day was set, there are almost no dated records. Other periods of the pre-war timeline are documented extensively. The months immediately before the vault's closure are nearly empty. Theorists call this absence the Silent Spring. The theory holds that this period was deliberately removed from the documentary record, that whoever prepared the vault's archives before opening excised the entries that covered those months, leaving a gap that the available records acknowledge only through their own absence. What occurred in the territory between March and October of 2076 was significant enough that someone decided the survivors emerging from the vault should not have access to it. The silence in the record is not accidental. It is the most deliberate thing in it. The silence in certain physical locations carries a different quality. In the Savage Divide, the mountainous central region of the territory-specific areas produce an ambient tone that exists just below the threshold of clear perception. It has been described by those who notice it as a low, structured hum, present enough to register, quiet enough to seem like imagination. Analysis of the raw audio extracted from these locations has found something more specific than an atmospheric effect. The tone oscillates between 2 frequencies at a ratio consistent with human brainwave entrainment in the theta range, the range associated with the boundary between wakefulness and sleep, with the drowsy state that precedes deep rest. The theory holds 2 possibilities and does not resolve between them. The tone was placed there deliberately as an element of sound design calibrated to affect the listener's state of awareness, or the tone is being produced by equipment buried beneath the Savage Divide pre-war research instruments still operating, broadcasting a frequency that was designed to affect human consciousness, doing so without maintenance or direction for 25 years. Both explanations are, in their different ways, difficult to set aside. One suggests intention in the design. The other suggests something still running beneath the surface that was never meant to stop. The Pip-Boy radio, which connects survivors to the broadcasts that move through the territory, is documented as receiving several identifiable signals. What it occasionally receives that cannot be identified has been the subject of persistent attention since the territory was first opened. Brief fragments, lasting no more than 4 seconds, each have been reported and documented across years of observation. A few seconds of music from a composition that does not exist in the known audio library. A voice enumerating numbers in a language that has not been identified by any community member who has examined the recordings. And once, cited more than any other instance, a clear recording of a child's voice, words inaudible, followed immediately by static. These fragments do not repeat on any observable schedule. They have no attached source in any identified system. The theory holds that they are not errors in the territory's audio architecture. They are content from storylines that were removed before the territory opened, audio triggers that were not fully deactivated, still firing on their original schedules, still attempting to deliver fragments of stories that were never authorized to be told. The territory is still trying to say something. The permission to say it was withdrawn. The attempt continues anyway. What was withdrawn before the territory opened was, in some cases, substantial. Analysis of audio files preserved in the territory's underlying structure has recovered voice line recordings that were never placed into the accessible world lines, recorded by actors, written into a narrative, and then removed before anyone outside the development process could hear them. The volume of this removed material is not consistent with ordinary content trimming. It is consistent with the removal of a complete narrative arc. The lines that have been recovered and assembled describe a story in which the Vault resident discovers that the overseer's identity is not what her records suggest, encounters a Vault-Tec executive who survived outside any vault in a concealed location, and learns what occurred in the territory during the silent spring of 2076. The theory holds that this storyline was not abandoned. It was preserved, held back from the initial release, maintained in a form that could be reintroduced, and intended for a future update that would deliver it as new content rather than acknowledge it as material that was always there. The story was always going to be told. The timing was the only thing that was adjusted. The mechanism through which the territory's story connects to the broader world of the franchise was introduced through the Expedition's update, content that took survivors beyond the borders of West Virginia for the first time to the ruins of Atlantic City. Atlantic City, in the pre-war geography of the Fallout universe, sat at the intersection of trade and transportation routes that connected it to the capital wasteland of Fallout 3 and the Commonwealth of Fallout 4. The theory about what expeditions represent holds that they are not simply content additions. They are the structural mechanism through which the territory's timeline will be formally joined to the timelines of the other games, the bridge that will eventually establish the survivors of Vault-76 as participants in events that other games have documented from different perspectives. The territory has been running in quiet parallel to the rest of the franchise's history. Expeditions are the first step toward making that parallel visible. The Fallout television series takes place in 2296, 20 years after the period documented in Fallout 76, and concurrent with the events of Fallout 4. The theory connecting the series to the territory's rebuilding holds that what the Vault residents built has already shaped the world that the television series depicts in ways the show has not yet made explicit. A stable and functioning population in the rebuilt territory by 2296 would have placed pressure on the factions that appear in Season 2, the NCR remnants, the Brotherhood of Steel, the emerging powers around New Vegas. The New California Republic's organizational philosophy, in some form, may have reached the rebuilt settlements of the territory through the same migration routes that connected the East Coast after the war. Caesar's Legion's expansion patterns, documented across multiple settings, would have brought scouts into contact with the territory's communities before any formal declaration was made. The survivors who rebuilt the hills of West Virginia did not rebuild in isolation. They rebuilt in a world that was already being reshaped by forces moving toward them from every direction. Sound travels in all directions and through all barriers, and the frequencies that carry meaning are not always the ones clearly heard. There is a version of the Fallout universe that exists only in the space between the games and the television series, a version assembled from the connections between them, from the details each medium remembered that the other left out, from the theories that emerge when the two are examined together rather than separately. The Fallout television series, across its first 2 seasons, has not simply adapted the world of the games. It has added to it, revised parts of it, and in certain cases, provided answers to questions that the games had been carrying without resolution for years. The theories that have developed at the intersection of the show and Fallout 76 specifically are among the most carefully constructed in the community because they operate across two different media, requiring attention to both, and because the connections they identify are sometimes too precise to be coincidental. The first season of the Fallout series revealed something about the pre-war corporate world that the games had implied but never shown directly. Vault-Tec convened a meeting, a gathering of major pre-war corporations, including Robco and the research organization known as Big MT, to coordinate post-war planning at the highest level. The attendees of that meeting were shown, but not all of them were identified. Theorists connecting this scene to the territory of West Virginia have proposed that among the unidentified attendees was a representative from a company operating specifically in the mountains, a corporation whose assets in the region appear in terminal entries only as redacted contractor codes, never named, never traced. The theory holds that this unnamed attendee is the same organization present at the meeting where the post-war world was planned, present in the hills through the infrastructure that organization built there. The same company that helped design the end of the world was also quietly preparing something in West Virginia, and its name has never been written down anywhere a survivor could find it. Cooper Howard, who became the Ghoul, the pre-war actor turned post-war survivor, documented across both seasons of the series, served as a spokesperson for Vault-Tec in the years before the bombs. His work took him to locations across pre-war America, promoting the Vault program to a population that was being simultaneously deceived about the program's true nature. The theory about his connection to the territory holds that Howard's promotional work almost certainly brought him to the region, that Vault-Tec's operations in West Virginia would have been a natural subject for the promotion, kind of public-facing promotional content he was producing. The further element of the theory proposes that a recording of Howard's promotional work was placed somewhere in the territory before the television series existed, filed as generic Vault-Tec marketing material, unremarkable at the time of its placement. The recording is still there. It was not found when it was placed, because no one was looking for Cooper Howard in the hills of West Virginia. Now that people know what to look for, the search has begun. It has not yet concluded. The destruction of Shady Sands, the founding city of the new California Republic, established in Fallout 1 and grown through Fallout 2 into the most significant civilian government in the post-war West, was revealed in the first season of the series to have been caused by a nuclear weapon. The bomb that destroyed Shady Sands came from somewhere. The theory connecting this to the territory of West Virginia holds that it came from one of the silos documented in Fallout 76, specifically one operating under an automated targeting protocol that was designed to identify and eliminate large organized population centers that had not been cleared by Vault-Tec's post-war governance system. The NCR built a city that grew large enough and organized enough to register on that protocol. The old system noticed. It responded the way it was built to respond, without human authorization, without awareness of what the NCR represented, without any capacity to evaluate what it was destroying. The machine was simply completing its function. The most significant political catastrophe in the post-war West may have been caused by a targeting system that has been running without oversight in the ruins of the East for over 2 centuries. The second season of the series brought Mr. House into the active narrative of the Fallout universe, the pre-war casino magnate and post-war sovereign of New Vegas, played with precise control and particular patience, operating from the Lucky 38 casino through a network of Securitron robots and carefully maintained infrastructure. The theory about his relationship to the territory of West Virginia holds that House, during his centuries of isolation, became aware of the rebuilding occurring in the hills through the same pre-war satellite monitoring network that allowed him to track threats to New Vegas from across the continent. The awareness led to action, not conquest, because the territory had nothing House needed to take by force, but observation. Certain individuals who arrived in the territory during the Wastelanders period, and the updates that followed, the theory holds, were placed there by House's network. They observed, they reported. House has had eyes in the rebuilt settlements for years. The residents of those settlements have never known they were being watched by someone who has been watching everything for a very long time. The NCR's presence in Season 2, fragmented, relocated, rebuilding its identity around a new Vegas that has not yet decided what it will become, connects to the territory through a theory about the movement of ideas across geography. The NCR's organizational philosophy, civilian governance, democratic representation, the rule of law over the rule of force, did not remain confined to the West. Population movement along the East Coast after the war, tracing roots from the capital wasteland southward and from survivor communities outward, would have carried elements of that philosophy into contact with the settlements being built in the rebuilt hills. By 2296, certain communities in the territory may be operating according to principles that trace their origin to the NCR without knowing it. Governance structures that emerged from conversations with travelers who had come from places where those structures had been tried. The institution never arrived. The idea arrived first, the way ideas always do, through people who did not know they were carrying it. Caesar's Legion, which Season 2 documents as an expanding power, moving through the Mojave and beyond, has a documented history of eastward expansion that the franchise has traced across multiple settings. The theory about the Legion's awareness of the rebuilt territory holds that by 2296, Legion scouts have already made contact with its communities. The contact was not made as conquest. Legion outriders operating at the edge of expansion territory are documented to present themselves as traders, gathering information on population density, defensive capability, and resource availability before any formal military assessment is made. The communities in the rebuilt hills would have welcomed traders. They would have answered questions about their numbers and their needs and their relationships with neighboring settlements. The theory holds that those answers have been delivered to Legion Command. The rebuilt territory is already on the list. The communities there do not know they have been counted, assessed, and filed for future consideration. Norm MacLean's investigation into Vault 31, conducted largely in isolation through the records stored in the Buds cryogenic archive, has not yet reached its conclusion in the series. The theory about where that investigation leads holds that among the records stored in the executive archive are files describing the territory of West Virginia in the period that the available records there do not cover the silent. Spring of 2076, the months between March and October in the Vault's final year, when something occurred that was significant enough to be removed from every surviving record in the region, but preserved in the classified archive of the executives who knew about it. Norm will find those files. What they describe will not simply answer questions about the pre-war period in West Virginia. It will reframe what the Vault residents were doing when they rebuilt the territory, what they were unknowingly participating in, what the rebuilding was designed to produce, what someone sealed in a cryo chamber in a California vault had been waiting 2 centuries to see completed. The series, across both seasons, has made a choice about Vault-Tec that the games left more ambiguous. In the games, Vault-Tec's evil is systemic and documented but interpretable, a corporation that made terrible choices under pressure, that rationalized its experiments, that contained individuals with varied levels of awareness and complicity. In the series, Vault-Tec is something simpler and more damning. It is a criminal organization that chose the death of the world as a business strategy and executed that choice with precision. The theory that applies this framing to Fallout 76 makes the Vault residents the most purely tragic figures in the entire franchise. They emerged from their vault believing they were the hope of the future, the best and brightest, chosen to rebuild what had been lost. They were not chosen for that. They were the last experiment. They were deployed into a territory that had been prepared for their presence, observed by systems that were waiting for their decisions, and measured against parameters they were never shown. And they built something real anyway, something that survived the experiment and outlasted the intentions of the people who designed it. The series gave the game its ending. It was not the ending the game knew it was telling. What the screen remembered and what the game left open were always the same story, one told from both ends, of a truth neither had told completely on its own. There is a particular kind of question that the ruins of West Virginia have been carrying since the territory first opened. Not the kind that can be answered by reading the right terminal entry or listening to the right holotape. The kind that sits at the end of a sequence of events and simply stops where a door should open, or a named figure should appear, or a revelation should arrive, and instead there is silence. These questions have been examined by the community with the same care applied to vault experiments and creature behaviors. And the theory that has developed around the most persistent of them is not that the answers were forgotten, or that the development process ran out of time, or that the content was cut before it could be completed. The theory is that the questions were placed deliberately, that the silence at the end of each one was designed, maintained, and valued for exactly what it produces: sustained attention, sustained presence, sustained investment in a world that keeps offering the possibility of more. Several significant storylines in Fallout 76 conclude in ways that feel structurally incomplete. A chain of events builds toward a resolution. The resolution does not arrive. A character is referenced who never appears. A location is indicated that cannot be reached. The theory holds that these are not oversights in the narrative structure. They are design choices, open loops, maintained intentionally, because an open loop keeps the community engaged with the question in a way that a closed loop never could. Every unanswered question in the territory is, in this reading, an asset. It is held in reserve, valued not for the answer it contains, but for the attention that answer will generate when it is eventually delivered. The mystery is the product. The community is both the audience and the measurement of that product's value. The ongoing update structure of the territory depends on the community remaining invested between updates, and nothing sustains investment more reliably than a question that has not yet been answered. The Mothman cult demonstrates what happens when the community's investment in a question exceeds the content that was originally designed to receive it. The cult of the Mothman exists in the territory as an in-world religious faction, a small group of survivors who worship the winged entity from West Virginia folklore that appears throughout the hills. The content associated with the cult was limited at the territory's opening. What happened afterward was not designed. Residents began wearing Mothman costumes. They organized ceremonies. They developed personal theories about the Mothman's nature and significance that went considerably further than anything the available records described. The theory about how the territory's creators responded holds that they recognized what was occurring and began writing new Mothman content to accommodate it, expanding the lore of the entity in directions that aligned with what the community had already decided the Mothman was. The canon followed the community. The temple was built by the worshippers. The architects arrived afterward and handed them the keys. Beneath the Charleston Capitol building, which was the site of the Free State's final documented confrontation and which serves as one of the territory's most significant historical locations, there is a sub-basement level that has been observed but never confirmed. It is accessible through an exploit involving specific rendering conditions, a technical limitation rather than a designed pathway, and what has been reported within it is consistent across multiple documented observations. A long conference table, chairs, skeletons in formal attire, seated in positions suggesting a meeting that was already underway when the end arrived. The theory holds that this space documents the last gathering of Appalachian government and industry leadership, people who had access to vault placements and chose not to use them, who returned instead to the seat of their authority and remained there. They did not run. They sat down at the table where decisions had always been made and waited for the last one to be made for them. The space has never been officially confirmed. The observations of it have never been officially disputed. The One Wasteland update changed the territory in a way that generated significant community debate about the relationship between mechanical design and in-world meaning. All creatures in the region were scaled to the level of whoever encountered them, a practical adjustment to the experience of moving through the world that removed the earlier system in which certain areas were clearly more dangerous than others. The lore theory that developed around this change does not address its mechanical purpose. It addresses what the change means if read as an event within the territory's history. The ecosystem of the ruined hills over the years since the war has been recovering. Prey populations have grown as radiation levels stabilized in certain regions. Growing prey populations supported growing predator populations. The entire biological system of the territory became more uniformly dangerous, not because it was getting worse, but because it was getting better, because life was returning to places it had abandoned, and life in the ruins is almost always accompanied by something that eats it. The world became harder because it healed. That is, in the community's reading, a more honest account of what recovery actually looks like than any optimistic narrative of rebuilding could provide. The Skyline Valley region introduced a storm that has no fully explained origin. A permanent electromagnetic anomaly centered on the estate of a pre-war family whose records describe failed experiments and personal tragedy. The gothic tone of the content frames the storm as the product of grief and obsession, the atmospheric consequence of a family that went too far in pursuit of something that could not be achieved. The theory that has developed alongside this framing replaces grief with design. The storm, in this reading, is a pre-war weather manipulation experiment conducted by a defense contractor using the estate as cover for atmospheric weapons testing. The anomaly persists, not because of anything supernatural, but because the automated system producing it has no shutdown protocol. It was designed to run indefinitely under supervision that no longer exists. The estate was not a home where tragedy occurred. It was a testing facility where a family's presence provided a cover story. The storm is not a haunting. It is an active weapons test that has been running without authorization or oversight for 25 years and will continue running until someone finds the system that produces it and turns it off if a shutdown command was ever written into the design. The territory launched without the population that most post-war settings in the franchise contain. No named survivors moving through the ruins. No factions actively competing for resources. Only notes and robots, and the recorded voices of people who were already gone. This absence was the most criticized feature of the territory's early existence. The theory that reframes it holds that the absence was, unintentionally, the most accurate thing about the design. A world in which the survivors are the first people present, where what remains of the old world is almost entirely, its records of itself is a world that is asking to be read rather than navigated. Every terminal entry is the old world reaching forward. Every holotape is a voice that survived its speaker. Every letter left on a desk is a thought that outlasted the mind that produced it. The territory without its living population is a library, and the vault residents who walked into it were not fighters or builders first. They were, first, readers. The emptiness was not a failure of the design. It was the design's most honest moment. Those who have read everything the library contains, who have completed every available storyline, documented every faction's history, and traced every creature's origin through the records that survived, arrive at the end of that process, carrying something the territory does not explicitly acknowledge. They know more than any single character within the world knows. They have assembled, from fragments and gaps and the spaces between official records, a picture of what the territory actually was and what was done to it. The theory about what this knowledge represents holds that it is not simply the completion of a narrative, it is the assumption of a responsibility. What is done with that knowledge, whether it is shared or concealed or simply carried, is a choice the territory does not make for the person who reaches it. The ending is not a conclusion. It is the moment when the reading stops and the deciding begins. The territory trusts that the person who has read it carefully enough to understand it will know what to do. Whether that trust is warranted has not yet been determined. The body of analysis that the community has produced around the territory, the wikis, the documented observations, the assembled theories, the cross-referenced lore that connects every element to every other, is, by any reasonable measure, more comprehensive than any official documentation of the same material. No single source contains what the community has collectively assembled. The theory about what this represents holds that it was always the intended outcome that the territory was designed with gaps, not because the gaps were unfinished, but because gaps are invitations. The community was the completion. The deliberate ambiguities, the open loops, the questions with no attached answers, all of it was placed to generate exactly the sustained, careful, collaborative engagement that the community has provided. The territory shipped with room for the community to move in, and the community, which has been underestimated at every stage of this process, moved in and built something the territory alone could never have contained. The questions that were never meant to be answered were, in the end, the most carefully placed gifts, and the community built its home in the space between them. The mountains of West Virginia were the beginning of everything that came after, not in the way that beginnings are usually recognized, not with ceremony or acknowledgement, or any record that later generations could point to and say, here, this is where it started. The beginning that the territory represents is quieter than that. It is the kind of beginning that is only visible in retrospect, when the full shape of what followed has become clear enough to trace backward to its origin. Every major development in the post-war history of the Eastern continent, the Brotherhood's technological dominance, the Enclave's research programs in the capital wasteland, the Institute's synthetic organisms beneath the Commonwealth, the particular stability of New Vegas against a backdrop of universal ruin connects, when followed far enough, to what happened in the hills of West Virginia in the 25 years after the bombs. The territory did not simply exist in those years. It taught, and the wasteland, without knowing it was learning, absorbed every lesson. Fallout 76 is the earliest game in the post-war timeline. It is set in 2102, only 25 years after the Great War, while every other game in the franchise takes place between 150 and 230 years later. The gap between what happened in the hills of West Virginia and what is known about those events in the later games is significant and consistent. By 2277, when the lone wanderer moves through the ruins of Washington, D.C., in Fallout 3, the territory to the south is not discussed. By 2281, when the courier travels the Mojave in Fallout New Vegas, the events that shaped the Eastern continent's early post-war period are not part of the common knowledge that surviving factions carry. The theory that accounts for this absence holds that it is not a gap in the storytelling. It is a gap in the record, a deliberate suppression of information about what occurred in the mountains, executed by a faction that recognized the value of keeping those events classified. Vault-Tec classified the territory once, before the war, through the careful management of documentation and access. The theory holds that a second classification occurred after the war, that whoever inherited Vault-Tec's infrastructure and interests also inherited its institutional habit of deciding what the surviving population was, and was not allowed to know. The silence about West Virginia in later games is not absence, it is policy. the organization most likely to have inherited Vault-Tec's infrastructure, and with it, the institutional authority to manage what was known about the territory, is the Brotherhood of Steel. The Brotherhood arrived in the hills during the period documented in the Steel Dawn update, operating under a stated mission of technology recovery and regional stabilization. The theory about what they actually accomplished holds that the stated mission was accurate in ways that went considerably further than the public account. Vault-Tec's infrastructure, its vaults, its terminals, its automated systems, its supply networks, its research equipment did not simply continue operating after the corporation ceased to exist. It was absorbed. The Brotherhood moved through the abandoned facilities of the territory with the systematic thoroughness of an organization that understood what it was looking at and knew precisely what to do with it. The technology they acquired there, stripped of its experimental context, reframed as recovered hardware, incorporated into Brotherhood. Operational capacity accounts for a significant portion of the technological advancement that distinguishes the Brotherhood in Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 from the smaller, more limited organization that existed before the war. The Brotherhood did not simply fight for technology in the territory. They inherited an empire whose original owners were either dead or sealed in cryochambers, and they absorbed that empire quietly, without leaving a public record of the transfer. An orphaned empire was adopted, and the adopting organization became, in the generations that followed, the dominant technological power of the Eastern continent. What the Brotherhood took openly, the Enclave took quietly before the Brotherhood arrived. The Enclave that appears in Fallout 3, operating from a buried base beneath the ruins of Washington, D.C., under President John Henry Eden, is demonstrably more advanced in specific research areas than the Appalachian Enclave documented in Fallout 76. The FEV research programs visible in Fallout 3 reflect a level of development that exceeds what was being conducted in the territory in 2102. The biological research into post-war human genetics that underpins certain Enclave programs in the Capital Wasteland is more refined than anything documented in the available records from the hills of West Virginia. The theory that accounts for this advancement holds that it did not develop independently. Enclave remnants, who survived the collapse of the Appalachian operation, who escaped the Scorched plague and the failure of the post-war reconstruction plan, carried research data out of the territory in the years following 2102. Data on the FEV and its interactions with Appalachian environmental conditions. Data on the Scorched plague's biology and its relationship to the biological signal emitters developed in the region. Data on the results of every Vault experiment conducted in the hills. This material was transported to the Capital Wasteland and became the foundation on which the Enclave's more advanced programs in Fallout 3 were built. The territory did not simply fail in its post-war ambitions. It exported that failure, packaged it as research, carried it northward, and handed it to the next generation of people who believed they could use it to control what came after. Appalachia graduated its catastrophe to the Capital Wasteland. The catastrophe arrived there with better documentation than it left with. New Vegas is the anomaly of the post-war world. While every other major population center in the franchise has been reduced to ruins, while every other pre-war city has been stripped of its infrastructure and its architecture and its identity, Las Vegas survived. Its power grid functions, its casinos operate, its pre-war buildings stand largely intact. The credit for this survival belongs to Robert Edwin House, the pre-war technology magnate who used his own automated defense systems to intercept the nuclear weapons targeted at the city and preserved it as the foundation for his own post-war sovereignty. House's famous calculation, which he completed before the war, and which allowed him to intercept the incoming missiles with precise timing, is presented as the product of exceptional individual intelligence applied to exceptional individual preparation. The theory connecting this calculation to the territory of West Virginia holds that House's preparation was informed by something beyond his own modeling. House had access, through pre-war satellite networks, to information from across the continent. The theory holds that among the information available to him was intelligence about what was occurring in the hills of West Virginia, about the Scorched plague and the speed with which it destroyed organized civilization in a region that had more post-war infrastructure than almost anywhere else on the eastern continent. House studied what happened when a biological catastrophe eliminated population stability in a region that had every resource required for recovery. He studied it and drew a single conclusion that shaped every decision he made about Las Vegas. Population stability was the variable that determined survival, not military strength, not resource availability, not technological sophistication. The stability of the human population within the defended zone was the factor that the Appalachian collapse identified as decisive. House built his defense of New Vegas around that conclusion. The city survived because he understood, from watching the territory fail, exactly what could not be allowed to fail in the place he intended to protect. New Vegas exists because Appalachia did not. The Institute, the deeply secretive organization operating beneath the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, documented in Fallout 4, responsible for the creation of synthetic humans, indistinguishable from biological ones, developed its technology in ways that the available records have never fully explained. Synthetic organism technology of the kind displayed by third-generation synths in Fallout 4 requires foundational research that extends well beyond anything the Institute could have developed in complete isolation beneath the ruins of Boston. The biological templates required for synthetic human construction, the reference material against which an artificial organism must be calibrated to pass. As humans demand access to biological subjects with specific characteristics, the theory about where those templates came from holds that they originated in the territory of West Virginia, specifically that the biological profiles gathered from Appalachian survivors, people who had spent 25 years adapting to radiation levels, biological agents, and environmental conditions that should have been fatal, who had developed anomalous radiation resistance and enhanced immune function through exposure rather than engineering, provided the Institute's precursor researchers with exactly the biological reference material they needed. The first synths were modeled, in the most fundamental aspects of their biological construction, on the survivors of the territory. The most human thing the Institute ever produced was built in the image of people who survived what the territory did to them, people who were never asked, and never told, and never knew that their survival had been documented and used in ways that extended far beyond the hills where they lived. The most resilient humans in the post-war world became the template for the most sophisticated artificial humans that world ever produced. Their endurance was harvested, their survival was the raw material, and the synths that walked through the Commonwealth 2 centuries later carried, in their constructed biology, a trace of something that began in the mountains of West Virginia. The Fallout television series established something about Vault-Tec's post-war intentions that the games had implied but never stated with the clarity the series provides. The executives preserved in Vault 31, the members of the Buds program who survived in cryogenic stasis, planned to emerge into a post-war world that had been shaped by the Vault experiments and the managed collapse of competing civilizations into something they could govern. Vault-Tec's vision of the future was not reconstruction, it was succession. The old world would end, the new world would be designed, and the people who designed it would be the same people who had always made the decisions, preserved, unchanged, ready to resume authority over a population that had been reduced through decades of managed suffering to something governable. The theory that connects this to the territory of West Virginia holds that the Vault residents, who rebuilt the hills without any executive guidance, produced something that this plan could never have generated and was never designed to. allow. A community that emerged from genuine free choice, decentralized, cooperative, built through the decisions of individuals who were not being directed toward a predetermined outcome, is precisely what Vault-Tec's designed post-war civilization was structured to prevent. The executives in their cryo chambers planned for a managed population. What the territory produced instead was an unmanaged one that managed itself. The theory holds that this represents the only genuine example in the franchise of human resilience, operating without design, not the resilience that was engineered into a vault population, not the resilience that was cultivated through controlled scarcity, but the kind that emerges when people are placed in an impossible situation with no one telling them what to do and choose, without instruction, to build something worth living in. The game's most persistent criticism, that its world lacks the narrative guidance of a strong central story, is, in this reading, its most significant achievement. The absence of guidance was the point. What the residents built in that absence was the answer to a question Vault-Tec spent decades designing experiments to answer, and never did. Every major Fallout game, before Fallout 76, ends with a single figure making a single decision that changes the shape of the world. The Vault Dweller of Fallout, one destroys the Master and dismantles the super mutant army that threatened to overrun the West Coast. The Chosen One of Fallout 2 destroys the Enclave oil rig and ends the organization's Western operations. The Lone Wanderer of Fallout 3 activates Project Purity and poisons the Enclave's presidential base. The Courier of Fallout New Vegas determines the fate of an entire region through a single confrontation at Hoover Dam. The sole survivor of Fallout 4 makes a choice about the Institute that eliminates or reshapes the dominant power of the Commonwealth. In each case, the franchise's central argument is that one person, in one moment, can be the thing that changes everything. The story of individual, exceptional action as the mechanism of historical change runs through every game in the series as its foundational assumption. Fallout 76 does not make that assumption. It does not end with one person making one decision. It ends with many people, spread across many sessions, operating independently, making different choices, building different things, forming different alliances, collectively producing a territory that was not designed by any single vision and does not reflect any single intention. The world of the hills of West Virginia was not saved by an exceptional individual. It was changed by ordinary people who arrived, assessed what they found, and decided, each of them separately and all of them together, to stay and build something. The franchise spent every prior entry asking whether one person could change the world. Fallout 76 declined to ask the question. It answered a different one instead. It asked whether enough ordinary people, given enough time and enough reason, could change it without anyone being exceptional at all. The answer the territory provides is quiet and persistent and easy to miss if the expectation is a single, dramatic moment of resolution. The answer is yes. It is always yes. It just takes everyone. What the territory taught the wasteland, in the end, was the oldest lesson that what survives is not always what was designed to, and that what endures is almost always what was built together. As this journey draws toward its quiet end, there is one more thing the ruins of West Virginia have to offer. Not a location, not a creature, or a faction, or a machine still running in a sealed facility beneath the hills. What remains, at the end of 111 theories, is something quieter than any of those things. It is the shape of the world itself, the particular kind of silence that settles over a place when everything that can be said about it has been said, and what is left is simply the experience of being present in it. The theories in this final chapter are the gentlest ones. They are about rest and language and the stars, and what it means to lie down in the dark in a world that has been broken and is slowly, quietly becoming something else. They are about the people who built things in the ruins without being told to, and the last one, the one that closes everything, is about the person who has been listening. Vault 76's motto was Reclamation Day. It was printed on banners. It was spoken in announcements. It was the phrase that residents heard for years before the vault ever opened, conditioning them toward a particular understanding of what their emergence into the ruined world would mean. Reclamation. The word implies that something was taken. It implies that what is being reclaimed once belonged to the person reclaiming it. That the act of emergence is an act of recovery, of restoration, of returning to something that was always rightfully theirs. The theory about this word holds that its choice was not innocent. Vault-Tec selected it with care, understanding that the language used to frame an action shapes the intention with which that action is carried out. A population told it is being deployed into a ruined world to serve as experimental subjects responds differently than a population told it is reclaiming what was taken from it. The word deployment carries weight. The word reclamation carries purpose. Vault-Tec needed the residents of the vault to move through the ruins with purpose, to explore, to interact with surviving systems, to form alliances and make decisions and generate data, and so it gave them a word that made all of those actions feel like recovery rather than service. The lie was elegant. It was also, in the end, insufficient to contain what it was used to produce. The survivors took the word at face value. They believed they were reclaiming something that had been taken, and because they believed it, they acted on it. They built and organized and chose and persisted. The lie became the truth by being acted on. Vault-Tec designed the word to produce behavior. The behavior produced something Vault-Tec did not design. That is, perhaps, the most complete summary of everything that happened in the hills of West Virginia after the bombs. The behavior that word produced began with something as simple and fundamental as sleep. The earliest survivors of the vault's opening, those who walked out in the first days and weeks, before any settlement had been established, before any alliance had been formed, before the full scope of what the territory had become was understood, would have encountered a difficulty that the available records do not address directly. Re-entry disruption is a documented psychological response to leaving a controlled environment after extended exposure to regulated conditions. The vaults controlled light, temperature, sound, and schedule with a precision that no natural environment can replicate. A person who has lived for years inside that regulation, who has slept on a schedule determined by automated systems, in a room where the darkness was managed, in a space where the sounds of the night were never the sounds of an open world, does not simply adjust to sleeping outside. The adjustment takes time. It takes the slow recalibration of a nervous system that learned to rest in a specific kind of stillness and must now learn to rest in a different one. The theory that connects this to the physical design of early survivor settlements holds that the clustered, enclosed configurations of those settlements, narrow entrances, minimal windows, structures built close together with shared walls, were not designed primarily for defensibility. They were designed for sleep. The first generation of survivors built their shelters in the shape of the vaults they had left enclosed, bounded, protected from the openness of the sky, because that was the shape in which their minds knew how to rest. The architecture of early post-war settlements in the territory was, in this reading, the architecture of a sleeping mind, still learning to trust the world it had woken into, still adjusting, night by night, to the particular silence of a sky that had no ceiling. That silence, when the territory is at rest and nothing within it is fighting or failing or calling out for response, is a designed thing. Those who have stopped moving through the ruins, who have stood still long enough for the ambient world to assert itself, encounter a soundscape that the theory holds was the most carefully crafted element of the entire design. The wind moves through the forest in patterns that shift with the terrain. The water of Summersville Lake reaches its edges with a rhythm that is not quite regular and not quite random. The rhythm of water that has been moving for a very long time and has settled into a pattern that belongs entirely to itself. the birds that returned to the hills as radiation levels dropped in certain regions, produced calls that were recorded and placed with specific attention to where they would be heard and when. The theory holds that the people who built the sound of the territory at rest spent more time on that soundscape than on almost any other element of the design, because they understood, or hoped, that some of those who moved through the ruins would eventually stop, would put down whatever they were carrying, would stand still long enough to hear what the world sounded like when no one was suffering in it. The most considered craft in the entire territory is the craft that plays when nothing is being done. It is the sound of a world that survived. It does not announce this. It simply continues, in the frequency beneath everything else, patient and present, and entirely indifferent to whether anyone stops long enough to notice it. There are things in the territory that were never meant to be noticed. Idle animations, the behaviors that certain entities perform when no one within the designed interaction range is observing them, were extracted from the territory's underlying files by those who examine such things carefully, and what was found there is not what the design required. A protectron unit, standing in a location it has been assigned to maintain, repeatedly opens and closes the mechanical approximation of its hands in a gesture that has no functional explanation. The motion resembles searching the particular movement of hands, feeling for something in the dark that cannot be found by sight alone. A survivor NPC assigned to a patrol route sits down at irregular intervals, tilts its head toward the sky for a fixed number of seconds, and then stands and resumes the route as though the pause never occurred. A Brahmin, standing alone in a field, lowers both of its heads toward each other until they are nearly touching, holds that position briefly, and then raises them again. The theory about these animations is generous rather than conspiratorial. It holds that they were placed by individual members of the design team who, in the process of building entities that would be seen and interacted with, found themselves imagining what those entities experienced when they were not being seen, and having imagined it, they built it, wrote it into the code, gave it a timer and a trigger, and left it running in the spaces between observation. The protectron, searching for something it cannot find. The survivor, looking at a sky that holds something the patrol route does not. The Brahmin in the field doing something that looks, at the right angle and in the right light, like comfort. These were private gestures, written into the territory by people who cared about what their creations did when no one was watching. They were never intended for an audience. They have one anyway, small, quiet, grateful for what was left running in the dark. The sky above the territory was rendered with a care that serves no practical purpose. The stars visible from the hills of West Virginia at night are placed with accuracy mapped against the actual night sky of that region of the world, positioned as they genuinely appear from the ground below them. This required deliberate effort. It required research and calibration and a decision at some point in the design process that accuracy in this specific detail mattered enough to pursue. The decision served nothing that the design required. The stars could have been approximate, and no one would have noticed or objected. They were made accurate anyway. The theory about why this matters does not begin with the design. It begins with the survivors. The first generation of people who emerged from the vault and rebuilt the territory had no direct connection to the world that existed before the war. They inherited it through records, through stories, through the objects and buildings and infrastructure that survived, but they did not remember it. The world before the bombs was not something they had lost. It was something they had never had. The sky was different. The sky had not changed. When the earliest survivors lay down in their makeshift camps in the first weeks after Reclamation Day and looked up at the night above the hills, they saw exactly what their grandparents had seen, exactly what the people who built the vaults had seen, exactly what the people who designed the experiments and wrote the terminal entries and made the decisions that ended the world had seen when they stepped outside on clear nights and looked up. The sky did not know what had happened. The stars continued in their positions, indifferent and unchanged, providing the only unbroken continuity between the world that was and the world that remained. They were the only familiar thing in an entirely unfamiliar landscape, and they were always there every night, without exception, without the war having touched them in any way that the eye could see. For a population that had lost everything they had inherited, that continuity was not a small thing. It was the only thread connecting them to a world they were trying to reclaim. Sleep, for those survivors, was not the simple mechanical restoration that the available records describe it as. Rest, in the Fallout universe, is a function, a means of recovering health and advancing the hours toward morning. The theory about what sleep meant for the earliest Vault residents holds that this functional reading misses something significant. A person sleeping in a makeshift camp in the ruins of the world they were born to inherit is not simply resting. They are doing something that requires a particular kind of courage, the courage to be unconscious in a place that has not yet been made safe, to release the vigilance that survival demands, and trust that the hours of darkness will pass without requiring a response. And in those hours, in the particular silence that sleep produces in a person no longer managing their own awareness, something rises that the activity of survival suppresses. Grief, the particular grief of mourning, a civilization that the mourner never experienced, of feeling the loss of something inherited rather than lived, something known only through its absence and its ruins, and the records it left behind. The Vault residents who lay down in their bedrolls in the early weeks after Reclamation Day were not simply tired. They were carrying something they had no name for, a weight that arrived in the quiet and did not lift until the noise of survival resumed in the morning. Every sleeping bag arranged in a settler's camp, every bedroll placed beside a fire in the open land, represents a person who lay down under that weight and found a way to rise from it. The loss was real. The inability to name it made it no less present. And the rising, night after night, in a world that gave no guarantee of continued existence, was its own form of the thing that built the territory, the quiet, persistent, unnamed decision to continue. The 111th theory is not about the territory. It is not about any vault, or creature, or machine, or faction, or object, or sound, or star. It is about the person who has been listening through all the sealed doors and buried facilities and carefully placed objects and idle animations running in the dark, through the silent spring and the red mist and the stars that did not change, through the factions that were placed on their paths and the survivors who built on theirs without guidance. Through all of it, someone has been present, listening, following the thread of 111 ideas through the mountains and ruins of a world that is incomplete in exactly the right ways. The theory that closes this collection holds that the reason Fallout 76 continues to generate the attention and devotion and careful analysis that it does, long after the troubled circumstances of its beginning, long after the criticisms that greeted it, long after it would have been reasonable to move on, is not despite its incompleteness. It is because of it. A world that is finished offers itself to be consumed and set aside. A world that is incomplete in the right ways offers itself to be inhabited. The edges of the territory are not walls, they are invitations. The unanswered questions are not failures, they are the spaces where the community built what the design left room for. Every theory assembled about the hills of West Virginia is an act of care, directed toward a place that asked for care and received it. Every question asked about a sealed door, or an unexplained signal, or an unnamed grave, is a way of staying in the territory, of choosing to remain present in a world that rewards presence. And every person who has followed 111 classified ideas through the long quiet of this journey has been doing, without perhaps recognizing it, exactly what the survivors of Vault 76 did when they walked out into the ruins and found a broken world waiting for them. They stayed. They looked carefully at what was there. They built something from the looking something that did not exist before they arrived and will not disappear when they leave. The theories are the rebuilding. The listening is the act of construction, and the territory, patient and full of questions, it has been carrying since before anyone thought to ask them, is grateful for every person who has chosen to stay long enough to hear what it is trying to say. And so the wasteland rests not empty, not forgotten, but patient and full of questions that have always known, in some quiet way, that the asking is enough. Sleep well,